All right, I guess we should just get started. So, like we said at the top of the show, today we have two very special guests on the show today to help us talk about Bakuman. First off, we have Sam Leach from the One Piece podcast and a reviewer on ANN and whatnot. Hey, Sam, how's it going?
Heyo, it's doing all right. It's a little early for me, but we'll figure it out.
And as well as Nick from our very own allcomic.com. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Going on, guys? I'm excited to be here to talk slam dunk with you. Oh no, wait, we're not talking about slam dunk.
I guess we forgot to send the memo. Sorry, Nick. We trapped you into talking about Bakuman.
Bait and switch.
All right.
Though, whenever we get the slam dunk, you'll be the first person we call. I promise you that.
Mm-hmm. Into it.
I mean, it's the least we could do, right? But yeah, I'm really excited to have you guys on to talk about Bakuman. I personally, not to brag or anything, but apparently I'm the only one who actually had the chance to revisit the entirety of Bakuman. And I'm sure we will talk about why that is in a second.
Unlike the characters in Bakuman, I did not have the willpower to pull all-nighters just to read a manga. Like, I already did that earlier in the year for months on end to try and finish my film. So I'm not gonna do it again just for a manga.
I'm sure you could understand their feelings working and creating on something, Sid.
Yeah, and it's like how I can definitely relate, empathize with, oh my god, the struggle of trying to do a creative project like this and like sacrifice sleep and your health to like get something done, and like the insanity it takes a mangaka to be able to like complete 19-page weekly chapters for a full year for years on end. Man, I could barely even finish my film, and it's like that, not nearly as many drawings.
I guess we could just kind of jump into it though. For those who may not know Bakuman or what it is, just to kind of, just to kind of get the skinny of it, I guess. Bakuman is essentially a manga by Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata, the same duo behind Death Note, which we have talked about on the show before. And so Bakuman in particular is about these two kids, one being Mashiro Moritaka, who is essentially, he's just kind of going through the motions. He's kind of bored with school, and he doesn't really have a lot of direction in his life. He doesn't really know what he wants to do with himself. He's just kind of studying. And then one day you have Takagi Akito, who is this really smart student at Mashiro's school, always getting like top grades and whatnot. But apparently he is very into manga, and he wants to become a manga writer, but his art's kind of crap. So he notices that Mashiro is basically good at drawing, from his doodles of Azuki, the girl he likes, in the middle of class, and he basically coerces Mashiro into becoming a duo with him, and in order to create manga for Weekly Shonen Jump. And there's a whole subplot about Mashiro and Azuki getting together if Mashiro becomes a popular manga artist, and if he can get his work animated, and if Azuki can basically voice the heroine in his work, and if they do that, they can get married or whatnot. And so basically from there, the series is basically about Mashiro and Takagi getting into Weekly Shonen Jump, and spoiler alert, they eventually do. And the rest of the manga is basically sort of a look into what it's like working for Jump. And so I guess we can just kind of get started the way we usually do, talking about how we all kind of discovered and got into Bakuman and what our first impressions of the series were. Sid, do you want to go first?
Sure. Bakuman's reputation had preceded it way back in the day when it was serializing. Obviously, it was by Tsugumi Ohba, Takeshi Obata, so there was a lot of hype around it because Death Note was so popular and acclaimed. And Bakuman had similar acclaim as it was being serialized. People were talking about it with as much excitement as they were the big three, as they were One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. And so eventually I got interested in reading it too, and I remember it was around the fall of my sophomore year of high school, so about fall 2010. So it had been about a little over 100 chapters at that point, and then I read through the entire series up to that point. I liked it so much that I read through it again, not immediately soon afterwards, and then I had kept up with the manga from that point all the way up to its conclusion. So, for reference, when I caught up to the series, the Nanamine arc was just starting, the first one. So I read the series weekly from that point all the way to its ending. And Bakuman, I enjoyed the experience of reading it week to week. I enjoyed the manga a lot. Obviously, I was the same age as Mashiro and Takaki when I got into the series, so a narrative about, hey, here are these teenagers trying to make it big in Weekly Shonen Jump, and they're working their ass off to get better at art and to really become comics professionals, really become make it big and like the biggest comics magazine in Japan. And, that was really inspiring for me as someone who has always been drawing comics since as a kid, just for fun. And my art is I don't think it's still very great, but it definitely, when I was in high school, Bakuman definitely gave me another surge of inspiration to draw constantly and keep creating my own comics. And I could never, of course, replicate what Mashiro and Takaki did, but it was a huge creative inspiration for me. And as someone who was always deeply fascinated with Shonen Jump and Shonen Jump series, a look behind the curtain at the creation process of a Shonen Jump manga, at the struggles, the tribulations of the life of a manga artist, and all the politics of running a series in Shonen Jump, all the crazy details, the nuances of the survey system and all of that stuff. That appealed me, that enthralled me. A lot of people, I think, of our generation who had an interest in shonen manga, and we're, as we read Bakuman for the first time, we feel oh my gosh, so this is how everything works. Oh my god, this is such a revelation. This is ingenious. We didn't have this information before, but now we are finally seeing how our favorite manga are being made in one of if you were in love with the series, one of your favorite manga. And that's the core of the appeal of Bakuman back then, and I guess still now, is that it is a Shonen Jump manga about making Shonen Jump manga, and perfectly encapsulates the Shonen Jump spirit of friendship, effort, victory. It is a shonen manga about making shonen manga. And, that's what made it stand out back then, and I guess what makes it stand out back now. But of course, my feelings on the series have changed over years, and we'll get into that later. But I'm very interested in hearing what Sam and Nick's first experiences were with Bakuman. Sam, would you like to dig into what your experience with Bakuman was?
Oh yeah, I suppose it wasn't far off for me for what you went through, Sid, where I was in a senior year in high school, so basically just getting ready for college and stuff, and I finally had a smartphone. I got a cell phone way later than everybody else, but when I got my smartphone, one of the first things that I did was I downloaded the Viz Media app, and I was just kind of looking at stuff and buying One Piece volumes and yada yada. And I checked out the free preview on Bakuman, and I was just immediately whoa, there's a manga about making manga that is this. I've always liked Obata's art style. I think even for how graphic, even for how kind of graphic and I guess leaning towards realism his art kind of tends to go, or how dark his art tends to go, it's very magnetic and electrifying and exciting. And so that got me to start buying the volumes digitally. And so I think there was maybe 7 or 8 volumes at the time. I'd have to double check when each volume got released. But I caught up very, very fast. It was just such an addicting read. And going back to it, skimming through it, every time I skim through it, I go right back to where I was when I was 18. I'm just so I've realized like how formative it has been to me, and like how I look at art, and like what I think the artistic process is supposed to be like. And it reminds me like how much of that like I brought into, because like what I went to school for was like film. Like I'm very all sorts of like creative fields are interesting to me, and like artists are interesting to me. So like I brought a lot of what Bakuman made me feel into school. And so like it's super embarrassing to like, look back and see how many of my like my student projects were just like very meta, like me trying to make Bakuman but about movies. Like I kind of put the manga aside in my heart for a while, like, but like just opening it up again for this discussion, I was like, oh crap, this is just like a part of me forever, isn't it? Warts and all.
No, that's nice though. I want to go next just because I feel like Nick's feelings will probably lead into the discussion overall. But mine's pretty quick. So I basically got into the Bakuman around the same time, high school and whatnot. And I think I got into it when it was still running in Jump. I don't remember whether I just kind of like found out about it or if someone had recommended it to me. But I think I do remember. It was, I think it was around the time I had like just started getting back into the into Viz's print Shonen Jump, because there was a time where I bought it very religiously for about a year or two, and then I just kind of stopped. But then I think around like 2011, actually 2010, I think I started buying it again, and I'm pretty sure I had an issue that had a preview of Bakuman at the time, when Viz had actually licensed it along with like Toriko and stuff. And I remember reading a preview of that in the print Shonen Jump and thinking, oh wow, how Sid and Sam felt like, wow, it's a manga about making manga. Like, as someone at the time who like really, really loved manga and comics, but really didn't have much of an idea of like how they were made or what the creative process behind those were. I thought Bakuman as like I want to say I was like a sophomore or a junior in high school. Like, I thought it was very, very like infinitely interesting. And, for a while, really thought of Bakuman as like the guide to, the industry. Whereas nowadays I don't really feel the same way, but, as much anyway. I like back then I thought it was like so interesting and educational, just as someone who really had, again, no idea about the creative process and what the industry was like at all. And I remember, I mean, if you asked me, like, I have no idea, like, because I read a bunch of it up until I started reading it weekly, but I couldn't, like, tell you when I started reading it weekly, because I honestly don't remember. But, yeah, I think I read it weekly for about a year or two before it ended in, like, 2012. But, yeah, no, Bakuman at the time was just such an interesting series to me. And again, my thoughts on it have slightly changed, but I would say that I still like it, but I don't think I love it. I mean, honestly, like, Obata's art is just so. I mean, I'm a fan of his style too, especially the more like I guess rubbery, cartoony kind of style he kind of takes in Bakuman. But yeah, that's pretty much how I got into the series. Nick, what has your experience been with Bakuman? I am very interested in hearing this.
Well, you guys are definitely making me feel like the old man of the podcast here, but so. I had taken over ordering manga for the store a couple years when Bakuman first started coming out, and I was kind of in full cynic mode at that point. So I it came out and it started doing really well in the store. So with especially with manga, when something becomes really popular and sells really well, I try and familiarize myself with it just to, have an understanding of what it is. And, I knew the creators because Death Note, of course, is a gangbuster seller. And I am not a fan of Death Note. I think that is one of the most overrated pieces of garbage in the last 10, 15 years. So I'm going...
Strong words.
Yeah, I'm going to make you guys regret inviting me on this podcast here.
I mean, this is exactly why we did invite you on this podcast.
But, so, I tried to put that aside, and I picked up Bakuman, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is a comic about making comics, much in the vein of, like, Understanding Comics or Comics in Sequential Art by Will Eisner. Except it's not like either of those at all. And I really struggled and kind of made it a few volumes through and decided, okay, I have a firm enough understanding of what this is, and just let it go. And it continued to sell and continued to be popular, and I sold it, with a smile on my face and, kind of gloom in my heart. But, and then I'll Give It My All Tomorrow came out a couple of years later when Viz introduced their Iki line, and I read that, and I was like, now this is a comic about the industry. But I think that I'll Give It My All Tomorrow is a much stronger take, and a much stronger and more succinct take on the industry. But my experience with it was more or less kind of following a wave of popularity to understand what was going on with it. So a little bit less in depth than you guys.
So let me ask you, have you ever read Bakuman in full, like the entire series?
No, I've not. I've never been able to make it all the way through because it's just I can't handle it. It's a bad comic as far as I'm concerned, and I genuinely tried to do it for this podcast. I tried to put my biases aside and read it in its entirety, and every volume I got through was just a struggle. Because the perspectives they have on the industry are not only super myopic, like their perspective of the industry as presented through this comic, it's like you can tell they're focusing on really specific aspects, but there's a lot of glaring holes missing in this comic as far as like what's represented in the industry. And, they place a lot of importance on the reader and all this stuff, but the reader, is almost absent from the comic entirely, as is like the reading experience. It's this bizarre mixture of their opinion of what the industry should be and what it is versus the reality of what it is, and I don't know, it confuses me a lot.
I mean, there are times in the series where, like, that once the duo gets series up and running, like PCP, Perfect Crime Party, and Reversi, where, like, I think we get at least, like, one time where, like, you see, like, they see, like, kids on the playground, like, playing pretending they're characters from Perfect Crime Party, or there's one moment, I think, near the end where you see a bunch of middle schoolers reading Reversi and they're kind of talking about it. So, I mean, like, there are moments like that, but I mean, I do agree that, like, those don't really serve much purpose to the story, at least not in my opinion. I think we could have gotten that perspective a bit more frequently. I think that would have been nice to see.
They're also pretty wrong and cynical about certain things. I mean, like, one of the most famous examples that both you and Nick tweeted about was, like, at the beginning of the series, Takaki was mentioning, well, sports series aren't going to be popular anymore. But then 4 months after Bakuman comes out, Kuroko's Basketball comes out. And Kuroko's Basketball grows into, like, one of the most popular modern sports series. To be fair, like, when Kuroko's Basketball started, it wasn't, like, that popular. It took a year, I think, until like the first match with like Aomine School for it to like really hit its stride. But again, they completely fell on their face there and saying, oh, sports manga aren't going to be popular anymore. And then one of its peers that came out that year was.
And on top of that, like, Haikyuu comes out a couple of years after Bakuman debuts, and Haikyuu is still one of the biggest series in Japan. Like, yeah. that thing's a monster over there. But on top of that, this comic reads like a sports comic. The arcs evolve and stuff like a sports comic would in a lot of different ways in terms of having, rivals and rival teams and all this stuff.
I do pitch it that way sometimes. It's a sports manga about drawing, where the sport is drawing.
Basically. I mean, it's what they describe in the series as like a non-battle manga, like a battle of the minds kind of manga, and functionally it, is structured like a sports manga. In terms of like every like mini competition they have against other mangaka in the series, it's like its own little tournament, very comparable to that kind of structure from a sports manga.
See, I remember seeing that. Comment early on in my read through, and that just made me think. Like, I mean, I'm sure at the time it was like pretty close to ending. or whatnot. But that really makes me think, like, it makes me wonder how series like iShield 21 were doing at the time in the magazine.
Was iShield 21 even still going by the time Bakuman came out?
Yeah, because Bakuman came out in 2008, and then I'm pretty sure iShield 21 ended in 2009. So it was just finishing up, I guess, around that time, or it was on its last arc probably. But I mean, I guess for iShield 21 in particular, like, I know people have their opinions on the last arc and how unnecessary it is or whatever. But I guess I don't know if you know, Japan felt the same way, or I don't know. That just kind of made me wonder about that, you know. But I guess that's neither here nor there.
It was probably an observation they made based on, like, failed sports series in the magazine up until that point. Like, there was probably a recent string of sports manga that didn't get off the ground, and so that's what they were basing it on. But they, of course, you know, they kind of missed the point, or like they assumed too much of, like, you know, here are a few misses, but, you know, a hit was just around the corner. And it's still kind of the same way, you know, there's a lot for, like, every sports manga that has a long lifespan. You see a lot of sports manga that don't succeed in Jump, but that's kind of the same for, like, every kind of genre, you know, that comes into Jump. Like the romance series, Shonen Battle series. Like, before We Never Learned found its stride, like, they tried Love Rush, and Love Rush didn't last. So, like, romance. So, you know, it's not just a sports manga trend, really.
But also, I would also attribute that to maybe they're teenagers. Like, what do they know?
But they're teenagers speaking from the point of having in-depth knowledge of, like, how manga works. Like, they're speaking with an authoritative voice, and that is never challenged. It's, like, consistent throughout the series. It's like, you know, there are times when Mashiro and Takaki's views on things are challenged by an editor and stuff. But in general, when it's just them talking to each other about ideas, that is presented, like, as factual as, oh, this is how it is. These guys know what they know because Takagi is super smart and has done research, and Mashiro has learned a lot from his uncle, so you can trust their opinions on this, and that's never challenged.
Yeah, I get the sense that a lot of times these two guys are just proxies for Ohba and Obata.
Well, I mean, that's transparently what they are, I think.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're very clearly based on Ohba and Obata as a pair, and I think they put a lot of their personal experiences into Mashiro and Takaki's story. Like, I think there's a lot of reality they put into Bakuman, but of course they fictionalized it. So, again, I think that's what leads people astray on Bakuman sometimes, is that they take it for granted that everything presented in Bakuman is, like, for sure accurate to how things are, but it's been sensationalized to work as a shonen story, so it shouldn't be trusted as, like, an authoritative, like, this is the only way things are done, this is actually how things are done, when you should treat it as a piece of fiction.
I'm sure Bakuman is probably, like, one of the biggest reasons why, like, you know, people online are so obsessed with, like, you know, like,
table of contents.
The table of contents, yeah, and people taking that as, like, the Shonen Jump rankings or whatever.
Which, you know, it's funny, because it's easy to miss this, but very early on in the series, Fukuda asks his editor, Yujiro Hattori, like, oh, the table of contents are based on the survey results, right? And Yujiro says they are not absolutely based on the survey results. It's just like a general rule of thumb that the more popular series are placed towards the front, at least less popular towards the back. But they're not, like, absolutely ranked. But, like, that one, like, panel where that is explained is completely overshadowed by all the times in the series where they're obsessed with survey rankings and take that as, like, an absolute statement on a series' popularity relative to another series and stuff. So it's really easy to see how fans of Bakuman have misconstrued that idea, even though they try to clarify the difference, but they don't do a good job at, like, maintaining that difference. And it's also easy to forget that the survey results that they talk about in Bakuman are different from the table of contents results, because you'll consistently hear them talk about how one-shots are ranked and stuff But, when you see a table of contents, you don't know how a one-shot is ranked, as a reader, because, the one-shot isn't, like, being consistently serialized, so that wouldn't affect, like, how it would be placed in the magazine or anything. So, I think it's easy for people to forget that the survey results that the older authors in Bakuman, all the editors are talking about, they're different from, like, the actual table of contents and what the table of contents order represents. But, that's definitely, like, a miscommunication that has gotten out of hand and exacerbated in, like, the Shonen Jump, like, manga reading fandom.
I thought it was kind of interesting. One of the more interesting aspects of how they discuss the surveys and stuff is that, how surveys impact not only, whether or not a creator will have a follow-up series or a follow-up serialization or something, but the fact of how it translates from moving from Weekly Shonen Jump to a Tankoban release. So, how some stuff, how one-shots and maybe tryouts may never see the light of day outside of a Weekly Shonen Jump, just because it had unfavorable reader reviews. And, I kind of take that with a grain of salt, but it's interesting how, the Japanese model of comic release is that, you can, in order to get your hands on some of these stories, you'd have to track down the actual issue of Jump. Whereas, in Western comics with the single floppy releases, stuff that doesn't warrant a trade release, well, you can still find the single issues, and you don't have to have these giant tomes. So it's an interesting contrast between the two sides, and one of the few strengths left in how Western comics are released. Made me think about that a little bit, at least.
Yeah, I mean, if a series or even a one shot like that isn't popular, yeah, you might not see it get collected elsewhere. You'd have to hunt down that original run of Shonen Jump or whatever magazine's printed in. I remember I was discussing with Maxie on Shaman King a few weeks ago that Shueisha originally was not going to publish the final volume of Shaman King that would have collected the last couple of chapters of its run in Shonen Jump. And so if they had never done that, if there was no fan outcry to get that final volume released, imagine those chapters would never be collected in volume format. You'd have to search out for those individual Shonen Jump issues that would have those chapters in it to read them.
And I had a hard time believing there was an actual aftermarket for issues of Shonen Jump beyond the obvious stuff Dragon Ball and the major titles. But I got to tell you, after going to a few locations of Mandarake in Japan, oh my god, dude, it's for real. It's it is for real. I went into the flagship store in Nakano Broadway, and they have all these different stores split up across the strip mall, and one of them is the classics area, and the entire back wall of the store is just nothing but Weekly Shonen Jump issues. You want the first issue Fist of the North Star appeared in, they pull it right off the shelf for you.
And how much does it go for?
Depends on the series. I looked at the Fist of the North Star one was $20. But I'm sure but I'm sure some other stuff is a little bit more expensive, especially the further back you go, which is for obvious reasons. But
right.
And I was happy to see that there is indeed an aftermarket for Weekly Shonen Jump, even though these things are printed on highly degradable paper. So it made me happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of treasures stuck in those old volumes, beyond the series themselves. There are things in the original runs of those series, maybe some art changes that, were corrected for the volume, or, one-shots as we discussed before, or even heck, just all the news and little articles in the jumps. That stuff that people with a collector's mindset will definitely want to seek out and preserve. So, yeah, I can definitely imagine that'd be a serious business for people hunting down and reselling Shonen Jumps.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation there. I just thought that was a little interesting tidbit.
No, I thought that was interesting because I honestly I was kind of under the same impression that because I always hear all the time that in Japan people just kind of you're kind of expected to like throw away your jumps at one point because like you said, they're on basically they're printed on really low quality paper. So like, people don't really see, much value in keeping those over a long period of time. Like people eventually just throw those out usually.
Oh yeah, if you're living over there and you don't actually want to buy any of these magazines, if you commute on a daily basis, you could probably just pick up a copy on the train or like look in the garbage bin and they're on top. Right there's the latest issue of Shonen Jump.
Garbage hunting for Jump.
Like I'm not joking about that. I've seen it, so that's for real. So
wow.
If you're living in Japan and you're cheap, it's easy to find these magazines, if you're riding the train. So, pro tip.
Gotta keep that in mind whenever I go to Japan. Do some garbage hunting for some jumps. Maybe get lucky and find some Sundays and magazines in there too.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are better ways to spend an afternoon in Japan.
But yeah, to veer back on topic, so there's a lot in Bakuman that is trying to represent the manga industry, specifically the workplace culture of Shonen Jump, but not necessarily doing it accurately. And, then that leaves people to like think about, how like can we take any lessons away from Bakuman, like in terms of like understanding like what the workplace culture of Shonen Jump is like how much of it can we trust?
Like I never got too sucked into the idea that it was like a very accurate or a very or that was ever going to be like a how-to guide of how to get into the industry or how the industry is going to operate once in there. But I do think it brings up certain aspects of the experience that must be true, like the work ethic that it takes to do. Like you crack open, I think it's within like volume 2 or something where I'm trying to remember what scene it was, but there's some scene where like you're really faced with like how much work it is, how much effort it is, and even when logically that it must be a lot of work, like Bakuman puts it in a way that's like, oh shit, like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, Bakuman's really good at quantifying and representing like how much effort it takes to be a manga artist, like how much time it takes and how much skill it takes. Like before they're even getting serialized and stuff, Mashiro has to spend hours and hours and lose sleep just to practice drawing, just to make sure that his drawing skills, his foundation is good. And even then, like he still has to learn about like the best way to communicate his comics and improve like his skills on that front. It is a constant growing process for him throughout the series to like keep getting better as his art and realizing, oh, there's still things I need to improve on. Like, it takes hours and days, to just draw the series. But on top of that, he has to spend extra time thinking about how to improve his own art constantly. And so Bakuman's really good at communicating that effort and like that daunting task and the scale of that task. Like the idea that Mashiro decides he's going to replicate 100 different pages of a battle manga from 10 different battle manga, like 1,000 pages of battle manga. That's like an insane amount of effort, and that's just to get better at drawing, just so that they can have the skills ready for weekly series. And then, of course, when they get their first weekly series, like Obata really expertly communicates, like just in the face of Mashiro, like how much toll it is taking on him physically, like bags under his eyes, like weak posture, like he can barely like stand up and like sit up during the meetings with Hattori, and that all culminates in him like having to be hospitalized because of liver failure, I think it was. Like he incurred some medical problem because of malnutrition and overwork. And I think that all of that really, really communicates that this is a really, really taxing lifestyle. And I think that was incredibly important for a lot of young readers to kind of recognize, is that, making manga is something that only people who truly love manga could put up with, because the amount of effort and physical and mental toil it takes on you is insane.
And even then, a related element that I think Bakuman was very good at sort of communicating to me at that age was, like how much your ego has to get put through the ringer at any given point. Like how much like you can put so much work into something and be so proud of something, but then like you also have to be the kind of person who has the guts to just throw it away and start something new.
Yeah.
Because there's always going to be somebody who's going to get ahead of you if you dwell too much on one thing or.
Yeah, like the most iconic scene in Bakuman for me, like one of the most iconic scenes is like the end of Volume 2, where they've just spent like a lot of time working on these storyboards for a series they want to pitch, but then they realize, it's not going to beat Eiji Nizuma's work. They're not good enough yet. And so they don't show it to Hattori, and like Mashiro just throws it all away into the river because, we're going to start over from scratch. We're going to keep improving and we're going to make something that will beat Nizuma. We're not good enough yet. And that was like one of the most powerful moments for me, like back then, and even in the reread, I still love that moment. And then consistently throughout the series, they have to learn through trial and error. They make a new work, but that new work is just a stepping stone to get to something else. Like when they are trying to come up with the ideas for PCP, they try 2 different other ideas, both of which don't really succeed, but they learn from those ideas and put that into PCP. And it's just a constant learning process for them, and not just them, like for other, creators. And it's also very important, like how much advice they take from their editor, and like knowing when to take editor suggestions and knowing when to stand up for their own ideas. But like another very powerful moment is like when Takahama, who is one of their peers, like he's complaining about Miura, who is also their editor, and like he goes up to Sasaki-san and he's like, I want a different editor than Miura. He's not letting me draw what he wants. And Sasaki-san is like, I will not give you another editor. If you are not being able to draw what you want, that is your problem. That is not the problem of your editor. You're basically telling me you are not good enough to draw what you want if you can't do it under Miura's supervision. And so, that's a really important moment to let go of your own ego and just focus on getting better under your circumstances and like learning to take advice with humility, but also like learning how to do what you want while taking feedback and suggestions that you don't want to take but are important and you need to take anyway. So like creative concessions like that while still making something that you're proud of, that is a really important lesson to take away too as a creative professional.
But it's also a kind of a scary lesson that makes the editorial staff look like assholes sometimes. Like
sometimes. I think in that moment though, that was an actual good lesson though. I can agree with that. I mean, Miura, like, as a character, like, throughout the series, you're like, oh, this guy's decisions are just terrible. This advice he's giving them is bad. But, like, at the same time, you can recognize that Mashiro and Takagi can, like, work under those creative limitations to make something they're good of instead of, like, just complaining. And, like, that is something that, like, it's not just true of the manga industry, but, like, even the Western comics industry, I'm sure, and like I know for sure, like animation industry, you have to like be able to make concessions like that, but still be creative about enough to apply that feedback and still make something you're proud of. Like that's just kind of a reality of working as a creative professional.
I really think there's a major disconnect between how they present both the work ethic of these authors and the pressures that editorial places on them, and how the consequences of those impact the creators. Because, like you were mentioning earlier, God, I can't remember the character's name because they're so unremarkable. Moritaka, he's the artist, right?
Yeah, okay.
So, he goes into the hospital and with liver failure because he's just overworking himself. And everyone's reaction is like shock and horror and you need to get better. But at the same time, under all that shock, everyone's like, wow, what a guy, what impressive work ethic. And, it's worth noting that Takehiko Inoue, the creator of Vagabond and Slam Dunk and everything, that's exactly what happened to him and why his schedule is so sporadic now. He worked himself into the hospital and he had an awakening and he was like, look, I can't do this. I'm going to kill myself if I keep doing this. And, it's the same thing that killed Tezuka. Tezuka overworked himself to death. And it's the thing that Shigeru Mizuki cites as being like one of the most important things of how he decided to work. He was like, I needed to get proper rest every night. I needed to adhere to self-care. And my editors and the companies I worked for be damned over it, because my life was more important to me than my comics. And I feel like my comics succeeded more because of that. So, I think that Bakuman, while it does portray the lifestyle of a manga artist fairly accurately to what we understand it to be, it doesn't challenge that lifestyle and the way like Shueisha and publishers exert that lifestyle onto manga artists. And I think that's one of the major faults of the series, is that, especially for something in Shonen Jump, running in Shonen Jump where younger readers are supposed to read this, to not challenge that at all and say, you want to be a manga artist? Prepare to suffer. That's a terrible message to send to kids.
Yeah, I think that it is a little... I think you could argue it's like an example of toxic masculinity in the way like it glorifies overworking yourself, because that is like what a true man does. I mean, there's this conversation that Takagi has with Asuki in the hospital, and Asuki's like, you're the one who called me and saying like this to help me stop, Mashiro from working. So why are you not doing anything now? And Takagi's like, well, I guess it's because I'm a man. I gotta respect like Mashiro's dedication here. And it's like, what the heck, man?
I almost threw my phone.
Yeah. There's this, and again, they repeatedly reference the ending of Ashita no Joe, like, or not even just the ending, like, ideas from Ashita no Joe. Like, in chapter 2 or 3, Mashiro's dad, like, quotes Joe's famous, like, burn to white ash line. And then again, that's referenced when Mashiro's in hospital, where he said to Takagi that he feels like Joe going into the final match. And Takagi's like, but wait, didn't Joe die? And it's like, I think you're kind of taking away the wrong message from Ashita no Joe and Joe Yabuki's life and how that ended up. Like, it's like you're kind of glorifying this idea, this masculine idea that, oh, you worked yourself to white ash, you put all your all into it, and you leave yourself with no regrets. But it's like, you should value your life a little more, I think. You shouldn't, like, put yourself into this desperation, overwork yourself, and, like, not enjoy your life. That's kind of a bad message to send to kids. You're also kind of like reading the ending of Ashita no Joe wrong. It's supposed to be like a melancholy ending. Also, like, Joe doesn't not necessarily die at the end of the series. It's supposed to be an ambiguous ending, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah.
I was gonna say that was like that was definitely one of the most like iconic moments in Bakuman to me, just as a teenager, was just seeing an actual manga artist like be hospitalized because of overworked. Like that really shook me up as a teenager, because I honestly really had, I had no idea at the time that like, these creators and these artists like put themselves through the ringer just for their work. Like, you constantly hear stuff about people like Oda, who is now taking frequent enough breaks from his work. I want to say at least like one break every month, every 2 months, something like that. It's
like once a month.
It's frequent enough that, because he's had complications, because of how much he works. Like the dude only gets like 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night or whatever, because he's constantly working. And I mean, also that's because like, he enjoys his profession, and that's worth putting out there too. But I mean, like, they're making him take these breaks now because they don't want this man to kill himself for his work. Yeah. And like, that was just such an informative thing for me as a teenager to learn just how much these artists can suffer for their work sometimes, whether it's through their own passion or whatnot. It was just something that, while I agree that, you know, it is kind of it's very dangerous to like glorify, you know, this this thing where it's like, oh man, he worked himself to death, like he's a real man or whatnot. Like that's a very dangerous mindset, I agree. But I mean, as a teenager, I couldn't help but respect Mashiro for his work ethic a little bit, because it's like, or I guess just like, you know, manga artists in general, like, wow, these guys like really put their all into their work, like, and that made me just respect artists like so much more. You know, it taught me to not take these series or these works for granted, and I think that's still valuable.
Yeah, I felt the same way when I was reading it and still reading it. Like, I still like admire Mashiro's dedication. I still take a lot, you know, out of that commitment and like what that means. But I also feel like there's still mixed messages, because during that arc, the editorial department is trying to be the voice of reason, saying, you know, no, you should not overwork yourself like this. We are not going to run your series. Do not work on this. We want you to be healthy, and then you can come back. Take care of yourself first. Like, that's what Sasaki-san says. That's like that's the opinion of all the editors, besides, you know, like Miura, who just kind of goes along with it because he gets caught up in like what Mashiro wants to do. It doesn't think about what, you know, what's better for them, what would be healthier for them. So, like, on the one hand, you know, you do have, like, the voice of reason editors, but, like, they ignore that. Like, Mashiro and Tagaki and everyone around them, they ignore that. They, like, go up to, like, boycott Jump for the decision of, like, you know, putting their series on hiatus. Like, there's just mixed messages and, like, what you're supposed to take away and, like, what are you supposed to, like, and what lesson you're supposed to take away from this. Like, are the editors being unreasonable for not worrying about the health of their author? I mean, unreasonable for worrying about the health of their author? Like, what? It's just, like, you understand, like, from the character's perspective that they're so, like, motivated, like, so desperate to, like, make their work successful and get an anime, right? So you understand why Mashiro and Takagi are like that, but, like, why are their friends not concerned about Mashiro's well-being? You know, it's just,
I liken it to like a story about a story that's supposed to be like a cautious warning against drug addiction by a person who's still addicted to drugs. And like, I'm not like even really making the joke. Like, I think for the Odas of the world, like, it is like a pathological, like, you are addicted to whatever gratification you're getting out of the process.
No, I mean, I laugh because it's kind of true. Like, that's the most accurate way you could put that, honestly.
Yeah, and I think that is, you know, like, to be conflicted like that, to know logically that it's bad for you, it's bad for your loved ones, but also it's still romanticized in your heart and you're still kind of struggling with that. And I think I like seeing people express those kind of conflicts in themselves. It's a big part of what I think gives Bakuman its energy. I don't think Bakuman has any one specific thing to say. I think it's like trying to just express a lot of the time.
But I would question whether or not that drive and that diehard ambition is a result of individual volition, or is it a result of how the industry requires artists to perform and to produce at such a rapid rate? You know, I don't know that I would say it's more the latter than the former, because, you know, having to turn in 19 pages every 2 weeks is an insane schedule. That is insanity. That to be able to do that for years on end for a long running series. You know, you have to be inhuman or willing to die in order to do that. Even if you have assistants helping you out, that's just a crazy amount of production.
Yeah. And I think, like, Bakuman presents it as, like, this is the drive of the artists themselves to want to do this, but it ignores the side where it's like, this is how the industry works from the editorial standpoint, is that this is a requirement that they're kind of forcing on the, you know, mangaka. I mean, we can actually see this through Hiromaru, in that Hiromaru constantly wants to take breaks and stuff, but, like, his editor is constantly forcing him and manipulating him to keep going, even though he doesn't want to. And it's played for laughs, but, like, you know, actually think about it seriously, and it's like, what if Hiromaru was working himself and exhausting himself and needed to take a break to, take better care of himself? Like, Yoshida is like torturing him basically.
Yeah, they really present it as, oh, Hiromaru's lazy, he doesn't want to work, which is kind of true, but like, I mean, if, like you said, Sid, if you think about it really seriously, like, everybody needs a break. It's just, I mean, and I feel conflicted because, like, those are some of my favorite, I think those are some of the funniest moments in Bakuman. Like, I always looked forward to seeing the wacky misadventures of Yoshida and Hiromaru. I would honestly just read a series all about them.
I'd rather read that than Bakuman, to be honest, but, that's just me.
I totally agree.
I mean, Hiromaru is, I think Hiromaru is definitely a more, interesting and likable character than, Masho and Tagaki, honestly. At least my perspective nowadays, I feel like I relate to him more than I do Masho Takagi.
I was gonna say, like, they're definitely like the other artists are like, yeah, they're infinitely more interesting than our two main characters, which, I mean, I think is sometimes a problem with shonen manga in general. Like, yeah, you have your main leads, but like all the secondary characters are like kind of infinitely more interesting, and you want to see them instead of your main character. But yeah, Hiromaru is probably my favorite character, along with Eiji Nisuma. He was always such a joy to see. It like me and Sid were talking off mic about, like, because we were kind of throwing around ideas as to, like, the idea of what artists, like maybe Ohba and Obata drew inspiration from to create these characters. And first off, I like to think in some ways that Hiromaru is probably the fictionalized version of Hideaki Sorachi, the author of Gintama, in some ways.
Though his relationship with his editor, the more I think about it, maybe it is like a reference to Toriyama and Torishima.
Probably.
Like, Toriyama constantly wanted to end his series and take a break, but Torishima was like constantly pushing him along.
But it's also worth noting that Sorachi also had his in and outs with his editors, which he would always talk about all the time and always bring up in the omake pages for volumes of Gintama, which is pretty great. But Sid and I were talking, and like, we ultimately don't think that, like, Nizuma in particular probably isn't based on any one person, because he feels like a character very specific to Bakuman. But, in terms of his, like, output and the terms of, like, all the work he puts into series and running multiple series at one time, like, that really reminded us of, like, Hiro Mashima and, like, the work that dude puts in. Like, that, I don't think I have nearly as much respect for any artist as I do Mashima, because, like, I mean, and that's not to say
his output is just insane. Like, what he can do on a weekly schedule while maintaining the quality of his art is, like, incredible. Like, I have problems with his stories, but, like, man, as an artist, like, I can't fathom, like, just how incredibly skilled that guy is.
Like, there's no way I can't respect him, honestly.
Yeah, no. But, yeah, I think Nizuma is kind of like the idealized a vision of a mangaka in the eyes of Ohba and Obata. Like, he's like an eccentric, but he's pleasant. He's a lot of fun. You like being around him. He's a guy who inspires others. He's a guy who constantly strives to do better and better. He never lets his series slip. Like, he's just a perfect artist in every way. They draw comparisons to him as someone who would be like one of the mangaka of old who could handle doing more than one series in a weekly magazine. Like, I think he really is like their uber ideal of what a mangaka should aspire to be. And I don't know if I don't think that's necessarily a good thing if you try to apply it outside real life, because Nizuma is inhuman cartoonishly so, because when we see him do storyboards in the series, like, it seems like he does it in like an hour or something, because like his editors are just standing on top of him, or other characters are just standing like right in the room, and it's like there's no sense of how much time it took, but the fact that they're still there and it didn't take more than a day, like, it's just insane. How could you draw a 19-page storyboard, like, that fast, like at any level of quality. And then later on in the series, they extrapolate and say, oh, it actually takes Nizuma a whole day to do a storyboard, and then 2 days to do the final drafts. And even then, that's just so insane. How does he do that? Like, and he never looks tired or physically exhausted. Like, he's always chipper and upbeat. Like, he's like such a cartoon character. I can't imagine a guy like him existing in real life. So he works great for Bakuman as like this unbeatable person that like he's larger than life, and you don't know how like a normal person can measure up to him.
I mean, he's like the manga artist that other manga artists wish they could be.
Basically.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
I think this is a good time to bring up, or a relevant time to bring up an anecdote from Western comics involving Jack Kirby in the late 60s. So Jim Steranko took over Captain America for a period of time, and dude wasn't turning in pages. So at 5 p.m. on a Friday night, Marvel calls up Jack Kirby, and they're in a panic because Steranko hasn't turned in his pages. They're going to press on Monday, and they don't know what to do. Kirby says, no problem. On Sunday night, he sends them 22 penciled, inked, completed pages for an issue of Captain America, and the issue ran on time. So, wow. Like, that kind of work ethic is, it seems like it's inhuman and impossible, but some of these guys, you look at Stan Sakai or Sergio Aragonés. I actually saw Stan Sakai, the creator of Usagi Yojimbo. I saw him in an airport one time on the way back from San Diego, and he was working on a page of Usagi. And dude knocked out an entire page while he was just sitting there in the waiting room or in the terminal before boarding the plane, like it was nothing.
Wow. And
then picked up the next page and started knocking out the next page. So some of these guys are just able to they're speed artists. They're able to, they're so in tune with their own individual style that they can just blast through entire chapters of a comic like it's nothing. So it's it really depends on the artist, I guess.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
I mean, it's definitely not implausible what Nizuma does, because there's definitely like real life artists who accomplished what he could accomplish. But it does feel like, oh my god, just like the way he carries himself, he's larger than life. Unlike other characters, he never like seems to suffer in health or lose any of his enthusiasm. Like, he never seems stressed out at all.
Yeah, and like you said, Sid, I don't know if that's really a good thing or not, but just I mean, like, at least as a character, Nizuma was always a joy to see.
Yeah, I mean, I always enjoyed him. I always found his interactions with any character really fun. Like, he always brightened up the manga. Again, because he's such an upbeat and cheerful guy all the time.
Now, here's a question. What about our least favorite characters in Bakuman?
Nakai. I don't... How is there any other answer? Nakai is scum, and what I hate about the series is like, yeah, I mean, the series, presents Nakai as scum. People call him scum, but like, they call him scum because of his work ethic and not the way he treats women. And it's like, what the fuck, guys? What is this message you're sending? He's scum because he's fucking trying to like take advantage of Okiko. He's like making like the women he works with uncomfortable. He's such a misogynist. He's just an awful human being, like, in every way. And yet somehow, like, the characters never like give up on him because they respect him as an artist too much. Like, even after all the shitty things he does.
Where was he at by the end?
Like, at the end of the series, he's working with Hiramaru, like, as his assistant. So like, yeah, he gets.
Oh, right.
He gets like even though he doesn't really change as a person, like he gets redeemed in the sense that they like let him stick around, and it's like I hate that.
His characterization is a roller coaster.
What's even more screwed up is that like the deputy editor in chief, like at one point he's like, okay, this dude is like causing us way too much trouble, like. I'm not gonna hire this guy anymore. But the other artists are like, no, but like we could still give him work or whatever. Like, hey, maybe he could work with Mashiro or whatever. And it's like, guys, come on.
Yeah, no, like, when, after the whole incident where he tells Okiko, because he feels rejected that Oki doesn't want to work with him anymore, so he becomes an assistant for Takahama, and he works alongside Kato, and just because Kato is nice to him, he thinks that, like, she's flirting with him, and he gets it in his head that they're in a relationship. And it's like, when Oki, like, wants to collaborate with him again, you know, he like, acts like all big and stuff. Is like, oh, you know, I'm already in a relationship with another woman, so if you want me to work with you, I will only do it under the condition that we get into a relationship. And then, you know, of course, Oki slaps him and stuff and says, you're awful. But Nakai's like, well, I know your answer. And then, like, you know, when everyone else hears about it, they're like, ah, man, Nakai, that was a dumb thing for him to do. Like, they don't take it seriously what he did at
Nakai.
all. Like Fukuda gets mad at him not because of how he treated Aoki. He gets mad because Nakai turned down a chance to work on his series again, and that's what pisses him off and makes him punch him. Not that he treats, like, women badly. And then at the end, of course, even after everything, even after he bails on Takahama, like, when his series is canceled, and he realizes he's not gonna get with Kato, like, he doesn't come into work. Takahama has 4 chapters left, he still has a job, but he bails on Takahama, and then, and even then, everyone's like, oh, Nakai, you can't give up, you can't quit, we like you still, you're such a great artist. Mashiro's like, hey, Nakai, don't give up. Like, Mashiro gives up, like, even, like, I don't understand why Aoki even tries to pity him and, like, say, oh, thank you for your work. Like, no, fuck that guy. Why are you giving him a shred of forgiveness? Like, I don't. And see, this ties into, like, Ohba and Obata's treat ideas on women, treatment of women, like, and stuff. But, you know, I don't think Nakai is adequately punished for, like, his awful scummy behavior towards women. And he's like, because all the characters still respect him as an artist and they don't hate him as a person. And it's like, even though he treats other people who are their friends awfully, it's just, I hate him so much.
But before we, because I think this is probably as good a time as any to get into, like, the biggest problem of Bakuman. And, you know, what was, like, you know, it's from what I've seen, like, it seems to be an issue in anything written by Obata. You know, there were shades of this in Death Note, unfortunately. But, you know, compared to Death Note, I don't think, while it does exist in Death Note, it doesn't exist on this scale.
It's so much worse here. Like, we read Death Note last year, and, like, I came out of it actually thinking, hey, Misa's actually a pretty good character. You know, as a character, you know, she's actually quite smart. She's actually quite, you know, in control of herself. Like, it's just really shitty that Light takes advantage of her and manipulates her, but Light's the villain. And then, like, L is also a manipulative. He's not actually that good of a person, so it kind of makes sense, like, why people are treating her this way. I still think, like, a lot of the sexism is scummy, like, the way that Ohba writes Light's mom and sister, and, like, has Light's sister become comatose after the kidnapping, and just does not get back to that at all. Like, just uses them as, like, plot devices, fridges them, but, you know.
And then there's, you know, Naomi.
In general, I walked out of that saying, you know, it wasn't enough to, like, turn me off the good qualities of the series, but, like, with Bakuman, it's so relentless, the sexism, and it's just so hard to ignore, because you're supposed to like the main characters, but they're just always so sexist and just have these awful things that since these characters are avatars and Ohba and Obata, like, you can't imagine that this isn't what Ohba actually feels. Like, Chapter 2 of Bakuman, where Takaki is explaining, oh, Asuki wants to be a voice actress because she knows that women should be naturally pretty and graceful and attractive.
Demure
voice
and
actresses are, so she's just trying to enjoy her life fully as a girl. She doesn't feel any pressure like we do about the future and whatnot because she's a girl. And by instinct, she knows the best thing for a girl is to get married and become someone's wife. And until
women don't
then,
have any problems whatsoever. This is a fact.
And until then, no, even after she's married, she'll remain graceful and polite. Oh, and because she knows her place as a woman, that makes her 100 times smarter than Awase, who is the smartest girl in class. But because she's not likable to boys, that makes her so much dumber. It's just, I fucking hate these guys.
But besides Nakai, Iwase is probably my least favorite character just because she's just not likable whatsoever, and I do not give a shit about her growth as a character.
Wase's a character I really want to like because it's kind of like with Misa is that, Ohba treats this character so badly. I want to like her. I mean, she makes it hard because she's possessive and obsessive in the same way Nakai is, in terms of like relationships. Like she is competitive towards Takaki because like he spurned her interest, and so now she wants to crush him and stuff. But like eventually there's a brief moment in the series where that transforms into like an actual enjoyable rivalry when PCP is just starting and she learns about like the conditions that if PCP isn't competitive with Plus Natural and Crow, like it'll be canceled. And so she calls Takaki up and says, I'm gonna let you know I know this, and I'm gonna let you know that I'm not gonna lose to you even though I know this, so you better be prepared. And then it actually becomes a fun rivalry, and then she becomes a better character for a little while, and then it's great, and then it looks like things are peaking up, but then like the Ohba continues to belittle her throughout the series after that because she ranks dead last in the romance manga contest, and then she Nizuma loses interest in Plus Natural, and everyone's like shitting on her because her story writing has become bit worse, and then she tries to commit suicide at one point, and it's just like, give this woman a break. Ohba.
Yeah. Going back to Nakai real quick, I do agree that he is a garbage human being, and I hate him every time he's on screen. But I do think it's kind of interesting in that somebody in my Bakuman thread tweeted. What was that?
Did Buggy say the Buggy was the one who tweeted?
No, it was Hitchcock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he tweeted at me about how he found it interesting that basically Nakai, I guess, has some value, some very little, but some in the way where it's like, unfortunately there are people like this, and that he found it to be sort of a cautionary tale, which I think is a valid viewpoint, but I mean it's still frustrating because because of all the other sexism that we have to deal with from the other characters in Bakuman. So I kind of see the value in that, but it's like this on top of everything else, just like it's still exhausting.
Again, there's mixed messages with Nakai's arc, because obviously we're supposed to think of him as pathetic and a loser and scummy for being so obsessed with women. Like during the Nanamine arc, he has all the male assistants fired because he only wants to work with the female assistants,
But he's a good artist, so he's okay.
Yeah, again, see, this is the thing, is that all the protagonists still like Nakai, even though he treats women so terribly because he's a good artist. They never criticize his treatment of women because it's sexist and misogynistic and awful. They criticize his decisions as a manga creator and not being motivated enough to get his own series or still continue work as a mangaka. That's what they care about more than his treatment of women, and that's what I'm saying about these mixed messages. And it's like saying, the series is telling you by what the protagonists care about that, they care about more about the professionalism and their pride as a mangaka than how Nakai treats women. And there's no criticism of that at all. You know, it'd be one thing if they were, like, trying to explore the sexist workplace culture of, like, working for a manga magazine and the mentality of, like, maybe artists and stuff, but they're not criticizing that. They're just presenting it as is and as matter of fact. I mean, it's the same thing, and this really frustrates me too, is when Okiko is, like, trying to do a romance manga for her next series, and it's like, her editor, Yamahisa, is telling her, oh, we only going to need 3 panty shots every chapter. And it's like, what? And then it's like later on Takaki tells her like, oh, boys love seeing, you know, almost naked girls and panty shots. That is like what a shonen romance manga is all about. And no, it does not need to be all about that. Don't perpetuate that idea that is a right, that is something to expect out of a shonen manga. That's something that boys are entitled to. What the fuck, Ohba? What the fuck?
If there's one thing that Bakuman has accurately taught me about the industry, is it did explain to me what the fuck was going on with the end of cross-manage.
Yeah. You know, honestly, rereading that, it also made me think about We Never Learn, Jump's current, like, romance manga, and made me think, you know, I always feel like the fan service in this is forced, because it feels like Suisui cares more about writing the characters and exploring their emotions than the fan service. Like, at the end of the first chapter, like, there's just this out-of-nowhere shower scene, and it's like, wait a minute, there was no fan service up until this point, but it feels like this is forced in, and frequently throughout the series, it feels like he has to force situations to do fan service, and it always feels awkward because I don't think he's interested in that. And so this kind of like explains that kind of reminded me, oh, so maybe this is why it's like this fan service is a mandate, because the editors think that that's what a jump romance comedy needs in order to be popular.
Or they've got a quota of boobs that they need in each issue.
That would really explain why there's so many Kirisu chapters, because Kirisu is like the only adult female in the series, so maybe like Suisui is more comfortable sexualizing her than the high schoolers.
That's good, at least? Question mark.
But on the flip side, Kirisu is also the most popular character in the last character popularity ball, in the series character popularity ball. So it's like, now he has to draw more Kirisu chapters because she's the most popular. I don't know.
I'm sure she'll have the most merchandise.
Maybe.
It really wasn't surprising to me at one point. Some character brings up Strawberry 100% and Masakazu Katsura, which are, if you're not familiar with those guys' works.
Well, Strawberry 1% is not done by Masakazu Katsura. That's a Mizuki Kawashita manga.
No, I know. But that was brought up alongside Katsura. So that's the only reason I'm mentioning it. But, I'll go to bat for Video Girl Eye and Shadow Lady. I'll defend those. But Eyes is one of the trashiest, most garbage comics ever published. And, the fact that one of, Ohba and Obata's characters actively brings it up, and the way that Miho and Mashiro's relationship kind of evolves is like a really bad clone of the plot of Eyes. That's really not surprising to me, like how on brand they are with talking about and depicting shonen romance stories, because God, they pick the trashiest inspirations and they're like, this is great, this is the epitome of shonen romance. Like, come on, guys.
So as somebody who hasn't read Eyes or this next title I'm going to bring up, so is it trashier than To Love Ru? Like, I'm trying to get a good metric because I haven't read either series.
I would say yes, because Eyes starts off really promising, and then it's just like a cock tease in the worst possible ways, and like it's about fetishizing the lead female protagonist, who's almost invisible in the comic, despite the fact that she is the other main character in the series. And then it's 15 volumes of the main character trying to hook up with her, and her admitting in multiple volumes, like, yes, I'm interested in you. And he's like, but are you really?
This sounds like a real downgrade from Video Girl Eye.
Yeah, and then he basically rapes her at one point. It's like,
oh, that's great. Yeah, that's terrible.
So it's So of course, that's why I'm saying, the fact that they bring up eyes, or they bring up Katsura in Bakuman as the epitome of shonen romance. I was like, yeah, of course you'd bring him up. That makes complete sense. That's on brand, guys.
That makes me ashamed, because I'll fully admit that, like, what was it, when I was like 15 or 14 or whatever, and I still had a Borders nearby where I lived, close enough to where I could walk. Every once in a while, I would always see eyes on the bookshelves and kind of flip through it, and I'd be like, oh, and I like, I would flip through certain pages because I didn't know what it was, and I would see all these panty shots. I'd be like, am I allowed to look at this? Like, are they allowed to sell this? And like anytime like people would walk by, I would like immediately put it back, because it's like, man, I really shouldn't be looking at this in public.
And that's the reaction you want to get from the teenage boys. It's like, oh, I'm feeling so adult because I'm reading like something that is like softcore porn. Oh. Like, that's the appeal. It's like, no, please don't like promote that as something that kids should be reading.
Well, yeah. Whereas nowadays, I like, from what you're saying about it, it just sounds, it doesn't sound enjoyable at all, and it sounds like something I would really struggle to get through all of.
If you enjoy reading a series about the main premise never happening for 15 volumes, then you will love Eyes. It'll be your favorite comic.
Oh my god.
I think it'll stick with Video Girl Eye.
I recommend tracking down Shadow Lady too. Shadow Lady is kick-ass. That comic is great.
Was that released in English?
It was, by Dark Horse.
Oh, wow.
Huh,
hopefully it's still in print and I can find it.
It is not, but it's cheap.
Oh, well, hopefully I can still find it. I found other, like, out-of-print stuff, so.
How long was it?
It's 4 volumes.
That's sure. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds really interesting. But I guess just to get back to the topic.
Also related to Aoki Ko's experiences, I mean, we brought up Mizuki Kawashita before, but, like, yeah, I feel like, I think that she might have been based on, Kiko might have been based on Mizuki Kawashita and what she had to put up with. As someone who's writing romance manga for Jump, and had to put in fan service in her series. So, like, reading everything involving Kiko just made me feel so bad for female artists trying to write a romance comedy at Jump.
Well, they give themselves these opportunities to have a bit of enlightenment. Like they have characters like her where she has experience in writing shoujo comics and she's moved over to shonen. So like you could question whether or not it's time to maybe get a different perspective on shonen romance by bringing in a female artist and trying to showcase some of the strengths of shoujo through a shonen framework. But no, it goes unchallenged, completely unchallenged. She's like, shoujo and shonen, they're just completely different. They're incompatible, it's a boys' magazine.
Yeah, you need to learn how to draw panty shots.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, god damn it. And I was so happy for her later in the series where she got to draw like a romance fantasy one-shot that didn't have to have fan service in it. And she was noticeably so happy about that. And I was happy vicariously for her for not having to draw all this bullshit anymore.
I also love how there are some points where like they talk about the like different ratios when it comes to like the votes in the reader surveys, where it's like, oh, we got this many female votes compared to this many male votes, and it's like, and they just like completely disregard that, like, oh, this is a boys magazine, like if it doesn't appeal to boys, then whatever. And I hate that mindset so much.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's like they're on the brink of these moments of clarity, and you think, oh man, are they actually going to make a breakthrough? No, they never do, because they're incapable of changing their mindset. And one of the most disturbing, may not quantify this the way I want to, but one of the most disheartening chapters in this series, as far as I got, was when Miho is grappling with doing that photo book, right? And she's an under 18 girl about to do this kind of predatory thing in order to advance her career. And at that moment in the comic, they have a direct forum to address sexism as far as what female actresses and voice actresses and a female presence has to deal with in a lot of
Idols
media
and
in
stuff.
Japan.
And it was completely ignored.
And they completely ignore it. But not only that, they disengage it in a way that's just the most disgusting way possible. Like, she brings it up to Mishiro, and he's like, well, you know, I would want to see you like that, but, you know, he never asks her what she wants.
Yeah. Like, she defers to him. She's like, oh, would you be comfortable with me doing this? And he says, no, I want to see you like that first. So it's like, ugh.
And that's
No.
and that's where we see the fallacy of agency in this comic, because agency only goes as far as the authors are willing to provide it for their characters, right? True agency doesn't exist. And we see firsthand in that example that agency for female characters in Bakuman truly doesn't exist, because Ohba and Obata can't be bothered to provide it for their characters. And it's like, come on, guys.
Like, right from the beginning, they established that their ideal idea of a woman is, like, that submissive, like, passive type, like Azuki, and, like, the competitive, aggressive types, like Iwase, you know, are not attractive, and, like, that's reinforced throughout the series as they completely shit on Iwase throughout the series, whereas, like, you know, they romanticize Asuki and stuff, but we also never see, like, Asuki, the ins and outs of Asuki's career in depth, unless it, like, affects Mashiro, so it's completely unbalanced in that respect. But also Aokiko gets shafted so much throughout the series too, because first of all, her character completely changes from how it was originally established, because when she is first introduced, you know, she's blunt, she speaks her mind, she's not afraid what anyone else thinks of her. But then, like, suddenly, like, after Trap is canceled and the series is transitioning next thing, like, suddenly her character changes and she's really unsure of herself and she won't speak up for herself. Like, there's this scene where they're meeting with Ishizawa, and, like, he's, like, making these just awful, like, sexually harassing comments about her, and before, like, the Aoki character, Aokiko, as we had originally got introduced to her, like, the very confident, like, you know, blood woman who is not afraid to, like, say, to tell people to shut up, or say that, no, your ideas are bad, and I'm not gonna agree with them. Like, she's just, like, sitting there, and she can't say a word, and it's like she has to be rescued by, like, she has to be white knighted by Fukuda, like, coming in and punching Ishizawa, and it's like, what the hell? Like, just a few chapters ago, you had Okiko at least slapping Nakai, but even then you're presenting her as vulnerable, and, like, she's not pissed at her, like, she's crying and stuff, like, so that in itself, like, made me mad. Like, why is she so distressed like this? This is not how she was originally presented as. Like, you completely, like, weakened her character for, like, out of nowhere, and now it's, like, digressed so much that she's not even standing up for herself. Like, what the hell? Where did this happen? How did this happen? Did you realize? I think what happened is that they realized that Aokiko and Iwase's characters were too similar, so when they were reintroducing Iwase into the story, they wanted to change Aoki's character, but they did it to the detriment of her agency and her ability to be confident, speak up for herself. And then she's reduced to basically being a love interest for Hiromaru, and it's like, yeah, it ends up being cute, but it's like she still just becomes like an object at that point for another character, like, to motivate them, and, like, to be manipulated by Yoshida in order to motivate Hiromaru. And then there's this brief moment where she wins the romance, like, the Lovers One-Shot Fest or whatever, you know, being able to do a fantasy romance manga, you know, that doesn't have any fan service, and then, yeah, she did something. She made an accomplishment. She beat out the rest in the competition. She beat out her peers in, like, one of the competitive fields. But then, when Nizuma is ending Crow, and all the other authors are saying, you know, we're not gonna let you end Crow. We're gonna be better than you, and then we're gonna prevent you from ending Crow. You can't do this. But Aokiko is the first to drop out because she was going to give this weak-ass excuse like, oh, I realize this is not suited for me. I'll just let you guys do it. It's like, what the hell are you doing? She is, like, the only, like, female rival, like, you're paying any respect to, even a modicum, because you're completely shitting on Iwase here. And now you're having her be the first to drop out for a week as reason. You're just not interested in her at all. It's like, it made me so pissed off because when I was a kid even, like, I was really invested in where Okiko and Awaze's characters would be because I really was interested in, like, oh, female writers writing for Jump and, like, their struggles and tribulations. Oh, that I was really into that, and then it just completely fizzles out, and they treat the characters so badly, and it made me so mad, just consistently how their character arcs turned out.
I'm so glad I'm not the only one who felt like there was no transition from her with her change in her character, because like I at one point in my read through I was like, Aoki was a different character, right? I don't think she used to be like this. Like, I had trouble trying to pinpoint the transition with her character because I literally couldn't remember, like, when did she change again? Like, it just felt like it came out of nowhere, almost.
No, yeah, really. Like, it's like Nakai confesses his love to her, and then she changes. Like, but like, why? Why is that one scene like completely change her character after that point and make her unable to trust men and not be able to speak up for herself? Where did this happen? How did this happen? What? It made me mad. Really mad. Because you have this strong, confident female character, and then you completely rob them of their agency. It's like, what the hell?
So if you guys will indulge me for a sec, I'd like to make a comparison between how, we've talked extensively about how Bakuman handles these types of situations. But there's a scene in I'll Give It My All Tomorrow, and apologies for the spoiler on this one, where the main character, he needs to unwind and blow off some steam. So he goes to a massage parlor, massage being in air quotes. And he's waiting in the room, and the masseuse that comes in is his daughter. And They kind of look at each other for a moment, and she leaves the room. And he goes and sees her back at home, and they're having trouble discussing it. And he's like, "Look, I understand you need money, and I appreciate that you're looking for it in the ways, in whatever way you can, but please let me support you, or please let me find you a different outlet for that, because I don't want you going there." And they have this kind of really touching father-daughter moment in which they kind of open themselves up, when up until that point their relationship is very muted and they don't really talk very much, and that's an opportunity for them to both grow as characters, but grow the bond between them as father and daughter grows even more. And then after that point, the relationship becomes healthier and they're more open with each other. So there's an example of how a comic about not about the industry can tackle some of that stuff and do so in a slightly healthier manner.
I was going to say, that sounds like a pretty powerful moment.
It's a really good comic.
I don't know if it's exactly analogous to like what happened with Aoki's character arc, but yeah, that's like a good way to deal with those kind of issues. So definitely, I mean that definitely sounds better. I think most accurately what I could compare that to is like the misunderstanding that happens with Tagaki and Mihoshi, where like Mihoshi thinks that Tagaki's cheating on her with Waze and stuff, and then eventually it comes down to like they all have to clear the air on the misunderstandings, but like the solution to it is, oh no, let me marry you so then you won't have to worry about me cheating on you because we'll always be together. And it's like, how is that a solution? You were always together before. It's not like that doesn't necessarily change anything. You should actually talk through your issues instead of like just being stubborn and not like, and expecting the other person to apologize first, and like, what is that part of was so frustrating too. So I think that is a good comparison to what you were talking about with that scene in I'll Give It My All Tomorrow, and how I'll Give It My All Tomorrow like discusses like has a conversation like that, and this has the result of that is much better and healthier than like what happens with the Tagaki Mihoshi misunderstanding of Bakuman.
Really, I just wanted to plug I'll Give It My All Tomorrow again, but I agree it's not directly analogous.
I mean, you are convincing me that I probably should be reading that instead of Bakuman, honestly.
Another one of the main difficulties I have with Bakuman is that it has the Eye Shield 21 dilemma, where the main characters are infallible. They're infallibly fallible. Let me put it that way. Like they do fail at points in the series, but it's not true failure. Like, you know that there's success around the corner. Whereas in I'll Give It My All Tomorrow, it's about this 40-something-year-old guy. He's a salaryman, and one day he wakes up and he's like, I'm going to become a manga artist. But dude can't draw. He cannot draw. Like, the difference in art style between the two is like night and day. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Heita Uma, that kind of style of artwork, or it's like, you can translate that to deliciously terrible. I love this art style. I think it's so great. But he goes in full speed. He's like, I'm going to become a manga artist, and the series is just him getting rejection after rejection after rejection, and the process is, I think, is more relatable and presents it a lot better, because it's about him growing as an artist and understanding what it means to be a comic artist while maintaining a healthy work ethic. He doesn't work himself to death because he's already 40. And on top of that, like, he inspires people to be better versions of themselves through the manga that he creates and as he passes it around. So, I think it's a much more positive and much more profound perspective on the industry than Bakuman in literally every way possible.
I mean, definitely the characters in Bakuman are prodigies, so they already start off, like, being really good at what they are doing and just have to get better. Like, when they are studing their first work to Hattori, like, Hattori says, well, it's not that good, but, like, clearly has potential. And then very immediately they really improve really fast. And so, they have a lot of failures and setbacks, but yeah, you do feel that because these guys are so good that they will ultimately succeed. But where it seems like I'll Give It My All Tomorrow starts out is that, like, the protagonist has, like, no skills and, like, no prospects, it seems, and so he really has to struggle. And so it's really like a come from nothing kind of situation that, has more stakes to it seems.
His major accomplishment in that series is getting a one-shot published. Like, that's the major accomplishment of the series, and he never gets serialized in the entire run of that comic, and he doesn't care. He just wants to get published. But honestly, every comic he comes up with, I would read that in a heartbeat. His stuff is so good. Anyway,
definitely seems more brutally realistic, which I guess would make sense. It's a seinen manga, I'll Give It My All Tomorrow, whereas Bakuman is shonen, so it makes sense that Bakuman's, like, idealistic, like, it's optimistic, ultimately. Like, you can do this if you try. It's that's the kind of message it tries to get across. Which, it's a shonen manga. That makes sense.
It seems to me that, like, part of the reason that they get as far as they do is because, part of the reason is probably because, well, we have to move the story along, and if we don't, then it's like, what's the point?
I mean, there's very frequent moments of time compression where we don't, like, see, like, all the work that they're putting into what they're doing, and we just see the result of it. So, like, your sense of time is warped in terms of, like, how much time and effort went into what we're seeing. So that does affect things, but it's always focused on the results more than the process after a certain point. So you kind of forget that, they're actually, all these accomplishments they're making are happening after a long period of time.
It's interesting because I forget if it was Ohba or Obata, but one of them at one point in their author comments in one of the volumes basically mentioned that, while a lot of time passes in Bakuman very quickly, that the reader should still consider Bakuman to be taking place in present day, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think he means, like, he wants this series to be, like, timeless. Like, imagine this happening now, like, whenever you're reading it. Like,
yeah.
So, even though the series, like, takes place over, like, a 10-year period, 2008 to
2018.
Yeah, basically. So, even though those are the dates in the series. Like, he wants, like, readers, whenever they pick it up, like, readers now to imagine, okay, they start their journey in 2008 and then, in 2018, and then you imagine, like, okay, how things would go as they progress from here on out, which, you know, with technology changing and, you know, even with, like, the culture working at Jump changing, that also kind of dates the Bakuman a little bit, though.
I guess that's as good as time as any to kind of transition into something I was kind of wondering myself that I really wanted to bring up on the show was that, you know, it's no secret that I think for some of us on the podcast here that Bakuman was sort of formative in our I guess in the way we understand the manga industry, specifically Shonen Jump, and I think back when some of us had read it back in the day that, like, you know, it had a lot of value to some of us when we were younger because some of us had very little knowledge of how some of this stuff actually worked behind the scenes. And obviously it had its influence over a lot of the Shonen Jump community, as we have seen, for better or for worse. But I guess 10 years after the fact, how much do we feel Bakuman has to offer, I guess, 10 years after its debut? Do you still think the insight that it gives into the industry, again, for better or for worse, is valuable for, I guess, manga fans in this day and age, or do you guys think it's just completely irrelevant?
I think as far as being a timeless classic, it is failed in that regard.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you're really interested in reader surveys, then yeah, it's a timeless classic. But if you're, and you know, some of the editorial processes is insightful and cool, but you know, when you get down to it, it doesn't really say that much about the industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's focused just on Jump.
But, and you know, I think more fans need to realize that there's more to the industry than Jump. Jump just happens to be the biggest name in manga, you know, arguably so, but you know, there's a lot more out there, and this comic presents it as if Jump artists are only influenced by other Jump artists, and you know, Jump is the main influencer, and it can't be influenced by anything else in the industry, and that's just not true at all. You know, like Tetsuo Hara, the artist on Fist of the North Star, or no, I'm sorry, it's Ryoshi Ikegami. He said that one of his primary influences was Neil Adams, an American comic artist. So, you know, influence comes wherever it comes from. And the fact that they present this like, if you're going to be in Jump, you need to have the Jump mindset and get a Jump tattoo on your forehead and, you know...
Yeah, or basically any influence of Tsugumi Ohba is valid, and everything else, ignore it.
Exactly.
Like, he references some stuff out of Jump, like he references the work of Iki Kajiwari, who he writes in the first volume, it was the greatest shonen manga writer who ever lived, you know, constant references to Ashita no Joe, Star of the Giants, all that stuff. So, references stuff like that, authors like that, but like, still, like, very limited references outside of Jump. Like, it is such a Jump-focused manga. Admittedly, though, I think that has always been its appeal, is that it's a Shonen Jump manga about making Shonen Jump manga that is so Shonen Jump focused. And I'm not really sure what another, like, replacement for it would be that is just that, if you're just interested in that. But if you're just referring to it as to learn about the manga industry as a whole, it's incomplete because it's only Shonen Jump. But if you're only interested in Shonen Jump, and if you're, like, passionate just about Shonen Jump, then I don't know, like, it's still incomplete and still inaccurate. But what other replacement is there? There isn't another Shonen Jump manga about making Shonen Jump manga.
I would argue that Girls Monthly Nozaki-kun is a suitable replacement for Bakuman, because that says
but again,
way
it's
more.
Specifically Shonen Jump is specifically like what I'm talking about here. Like, people, like, that was the appeal for me back in the day, and I'm sure a lot of people, is that people wanted to learn about Shonen Jump. They had this ideal vision of Shonen Jump, so they wanted to learn about it. They were excited to read a Shonen Jump manga about Shonen Jump. And so what is the exact replacement for that? There's a lot of manga about making manga that are excellent and way better than Bakuman, but that specific niche, what else is there that could replace Bakuman?
I can't really think of anything, honestly.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that that's what draws people to this series even now. but there's not a better example of what it does that does it better.
I think that's a problem, honestly.
Yeah.
Is that, the fact that Bakuman lacks any sort of objectivity at all, and the fact that it still is this paragon of, this is what Shonen Jump is. That, I think internally Shueisha and Shonen Jump should really look at that and be like, guys, we messed up. We need to fix this.
I was going to say even Sasaki himself has gone on record to say that Bakuman is still very fictionalized and not everything that happens in the series is accurate.
Yeah, I mean that should be pretty clear just from the fact that it is a fictional story, even though real people are depicted in it, like Sasaki-san, and many of the editors are based on real editors, like Hattori, who is Mashiro no Takagi's editor. He's based on the real Jean-Baptiste Akira Hattori, but still, they're not the real versions of those people. They're fictionalized interpretations of those people and this workplace culture. But this is what I was thinking about reading Bakuman. Is this is the appeal of the series, that it's about Shonen Jump. It is so focused on Shonen Jump, and people read it to learn about Shonen Jump. But it doesn't do it. Again, like Nick said, it doesn't do it with objectivity. It's just this idealized version of this. And so we need another manga about Shonen Jump that is more objective and is more realistic, or at least more honest about the challenges. Bakuman depicts the challenges, but it needs to depict them in a more, I want another manga that depicts them more down to earth and not necessarily cynical, but more realistic way, more relatable way that isn't this idealized fantasy. And again, the appeal of Bakuman is the idealized fantasy, but I think we need an alternative to it that isn't idealized, that is something that you could actually believe and is more accurate.
I think honest is the best way to put it.
For me, the main villain of Bakuman is Shonen Jump. Coming out of this comic, I actually kind of like Shonen Jump a lot less now.
Honestly, I felt the same way. Even though it was trying to glorify the workplace culture Shonen Jump, when I was reading things Okiko, you need to have street panty shots in every chapter of your manga, I was like, this is disgusting. Why is this treated as a matter of fact thing that it's you should just go with it, haha. It's no, this makes me sad.
I don't know, man. That's pretty on brand for shonen romance stories. Nisekoi is unreadable for that reason.
Nisekoi, I think, has a lot of merits to it. But still, that's the worst part of any shonen romance writing to me. It's the blatant fan service that doesn't need to be there, that detracts from the story. But I don't think it needs to be that way. I don't think they need to have these arbitrary requirements of fan service. What do you think, V-Lord? What do you think about fan service in shonen manga?
A lot of the time it's very much unnecessary.
Uh-huh, and why?
Because it detracts from the actual story.
You're just repeating what I said. Don't you have any ideas about your own?
I don't know. It kind of works for ecchi manga and stuff, because that's kind of the main selling point, but for rom-coms, not as much.
So you like it in Yuna of Yuragi manner, but not in We Never Learn.
I wouldn't say I like it, but I understand why it's there.
Okay, well now get out of here! Ruining our podcast! Go! Get out of here!
This is my favorite part of any Manga Mavericks podcast, is when Sid forces V-Lord to be our surprise special guest. It's always great. But thinking back on Bakuman and how it unfortunately represents Shonen Jump as a whole, and maybe even Shueisha to an extent. And I almost don't even want to say this because I'm just going to depress myself and everybody in the room. But thinking back on the events of Bakuman, I'm almost not surprised that Shueisha took somebody like Watsuki back and had him keep continuing work for Jump Square. Because, and that's a whole other, thing in general, but, at the time, I was man, how could they do that after all the shit this guy's done? But, considering how, like, how we were mentioning earlier, how they, like, treat Nakai as, like, this, obviously he's a very scummy person and he treats women terribly, but he's a good artist, so he still has worth as a human being and we should support him. Like, when I see things like that, it's like, I guess in retrospect, I'm not really surprised because, like, unfortunately, that kind of thing happens in real life too, and it just depresses me all that much more.
Well, I mentioned this to you guys on Twitter, but a lot of the mindset and the attitude Ohba and Obata's characters express towards women and how women are represented in Bakuman really parrots a lot of what women are talking about in the Japanese Me Too movement right now. For instance, this one woman tweeted that she wanted to get a really prestigious job and have a really intense career. So she worked her best. She did her best in high school. She got into Waseda, which is, if you get into Waseda, the common idiom is that you can get any job you want, right? And then when she went to interviews, the common thread in all her interviews was them saying, if you were a man, we'd hire you in a heartbeat. And
wow.
That kind of garbage is mirrored all throughout Bakuman, and it's ingrained in Japanese society, and to the point that all these women are starting to have an open discussion about it, and it's a problem. It's a societal problem. And that isn't to say that the American comics industry doesn't have that problem, because it absolutely does. But I feel in some ways that on the Japanese side of things, it's almost 1,000 times worse because of that. So Bakuman is a pretty damning indictment of the Shonen Jump culture, and in that sense, maybe it is an accurate portrayal of the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows it as a boys' club. Like, Iwase and Aokiko are the only two female mangaka we see in the series that, work for Jump, and there are no female editors at all. And they're constantly objectifying and, like, saying, oh, fan service, panty shots, like, women need to be drawn cute and sexy and to appeal to boys and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's just, like, completely, like, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of career momentum for any of the female characters in the series unless they work in, like, a female specific industry like Asuki does. But even then, it's like, so all the sexism goes unchallenged. Like, it said, oh, this is just what you have to do, and it's not like, oh, but I don't want to do this on the part of Asuki. It's like, oh, I have to defer to my boyfriend because I don't want to make him uncomfortable about this. And it's like, it's just awful.
And I guess I'll be the one to do it, but here's the obligatory 4 dudes talking about women's problem comment. But anyway.
Yeah.
Honestly, I couldn't help but think about the same thing.
Well, I mean, anyone can be a feminist at least, but still, I mean, I wish we should, specifically to talk about this issue in Bakuman, it'd be great if we could bring on, like, someone else, a female guest, to do that.
I can't imagine being female and not being offended at some of the viewpoints represented in the series. Like, I probably would have dropped it in a heartbeat, honestly. And even now, like, I'm struggling to kind of think, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I feel like overall I still like Bakuman, but I mean, like,
there's an asterisk. There's a very prominent asterisk.
Yeah, very. There are caveats to the series, unfortunately. And, like, as, like, I still have a soft spot for it, but, like, the more I talk about it with you guys and the more I think about its very glaring problems, like, it almost makes me feel bad for liking it, almost. Like, I don't know how to put it.
Honestly, I don't even know if I can say that I like it. Like, there's still elements I like about it, and I still cling on to what it meant to me back when I was a teenager, and what it inspired in me, and what I took from it back then. It was, again, like, as we've mentioned, formative, but, like, rereading it and taking those, like, nostalgia goggles off and, like, reading it as an adult with how I feel now, and, like, how I feel about a lot of the things it's talking about now, I just just can't. Everything I read, it's just like it just chipped away at me. I just like it less and less, and I can't say that I like it anymore. Like again, chapter 2, like I couldn't continue the series for days after reading that. It was just awful, and it never got better with that.
Honestly, I think the saving grace for Bakuman at this point is basically Obata's art, because I already really love Obata's art, but I feel like throughout the course of Bakuman, I personally feel like it just gets better.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted about how about a point where I really feel like Obata is he's really moving away from that super grounded, realistic art style that he kind of had to stay consistent with in Death Note, and how because of Bakuman's story, he's kind of allowed to how do I put this? He's allowed to be a little more expressive with his characters. Like it's really interesting the kind of like comedic reaction shots that Obata draws for his characters. Some of them are really like it's jarring in a way, because like, you know, I'm so used to seeing him draw in like that Death Note style that like it's so weird for Obata to like it's weird for me to see Obata draw more expressively and more comedically, but I think for me that was really welcomed. It was just really interesting to see his style kind of change to kind of adapt to Bakuman throughout its run. And I know Nick has disagreements with me on this, definitely, but I personally think that it was really interesting to see Obata adapt to different styles in order to portray the manga being drawn by these individual artists. And very, very rarely did I think, oh yeah, this is just Obata's style. I very rarely thought that they were like similar. Like the most similar, I guess like the series that are similar to me as far as his style goes would probably be like stuff like Crow and Perfect Crime Party, anything drawn by Takagi and Mashiro, with the exception of like when they were drawing Tanto. But I know Nick kind of disagrees with me on that.
Well, I the perfect example of what I'm talking about is the limited amount of that comic Color Fusical or whatever it's called that gets shown. It's like you can tell Obata's trying to manipulate his style to give it more of like an indie or like a I guess indie is what I'm looking for, like a more indie appeal, and he just fails miserably at it. Like those pages that he's mimicking look like complete garbage and not something that I would ever pick up.
I mean, maybe that's the point, because Kugi's supposed to be like, he's not supposed to be a good mangaka.
Exactly.
Because he's like this musician who thinks he can do a manga. He's a musician who thinks he can do manga because it's easy, so maybe the point is that his manga does actually look like crap.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll concede that point, but if you're gonna like mimic Heita Uma guys, then just do it. Yeah. Just go for it. Like, come on.
But I honestly do agree with you that a lot of the styles, like, they still feel like, oh yeah, this is definitely Obata, like, drawing this. Like, even PCP and, like, all the stuff that Ashiroge draws and all the stuff that Mizuma draws, they look in the same vein to me. Like, the only difference that I see in them is, like, the paneling. That's the only noticeable difference that you see with Crow. He has, Nizuma has, like, these more angular, like, he plays to the shapes of his panels, whereas, like, Moritaka, it seems like more like the stuff you would see in Bakuman. So, but it seems always to me that, like, Obata is imitating other styles, but I don't think he perfectly has mastered the other styles. So like they always feel off when you see anything done by anyone else, aside from Mashiro.
Yeah, and I mean like just as far as like paneling and the sequences go, like I really like some of the more comedic pages. I really like the effect Obata does where like I mean this is not really the example I would first pick, but because it involves Nakai, and I really hate this, where it's like, because there's a point where Nakai like is just out of work and he's basically reduced to drawing caricatures on the street, and he gets invited back by one of his customers, this young girl who's like, hey, I want to have some fun, come with me, and basically just turns out to be her and her friends like tricking him or whatever, which, God, is such a cringy moment. But like, I do like the little flourishes where it's like, I like the little detail where it's like these small panels of Nakai just like crying and running away. I love the way that, even though I hate that moment, and because again it involves Nakai, I really like when Obata sequences stuff like that, where it, like, you know, basically shows them kind of like transitioning out of the page or whatever. I really like the way stuff like that is sequenced. I think it works comedically.
I think they definitely do have a really expressive style, but their level of expressiveness is limited and in a lot of ways repetitive and stiff. You know, it's like it exactly meets your expectations of how crazy they'd get. Never exceeds, never falls short, always meets. And that's, you know, that kind of sucks. Like, they should have just gone for it, you know, and gotten kind of crazy, but
I don't know. I feel like they draw the characters extremely expressively, and there's a lot of movement in like the pages of Bakuman. Like, I think that Obata is very skilled at, like, even though there's the characters are not doing very crazy things, like they're usually just standing around and talking, like, I still feel an energy in their movements and what they're doing. Like, I think he's good at, like, making things feel like characters are moving and, like, something dynamic is happening just by the way he poses the characters and he lays out the composition. So I never felt like things were stiff. I always felt like the characters, you know, they felt like there was energy in the pages, and they felt like there was momentum, like things were alive and happening.
To that point, like, talking about the ways that, like, Bakuman is sort of like imprinted on my, you know, my teenage brain. Going back to it for this, just like refreshing for this podcast, I realized that, like, when I, like, have an imaginary conversation with myself, or I'm imagining, like, an argument, like, it looks like Bakuman. Like, it looks like Obata is, like, paneling it out, and, like, all that sort of, that sort of dramatic ebb and flow, and that energy that he has.
Yeah, I mean, I think it says something about Bakuman that, like, no matter how much we disagree with most of the content, I feel like we all have to agree that, like, it really takes a lot of talent to basically make a series like Bakuman visually interesting, because a lot of the time it is just
talking,
people standing around talking about, you know, their manga and stuff. And, like, even though it's mostly just that, like, Obata is great at, like, his composition is always interesting enough to where, like, even with how, like, text heavy the series can be, unfortunately, which is a problem that we also kind of have with Death Note, like, his composition is always still interesting enough to where, like, it never completely loses my interest. Like, it's still always like interesting to look at.
Yeah, it takes an incredible amount of talent and skill to make the mundane and ordinary exciting. And I think Obata is consistently good with that in depicting, like, this is supposed to be a realistic setting, you know, characters can't do, like, these crazy things, but, like, you always feel like, oh my god, this is just the way, like, the characters talk to each other and they get excited with each other. Like, even doing simple things like having characters talk while they're on their bicycles and, like, showing, like, some energy and momentum that way. Like, he knows how to employ tricks to stage things in a way that makes them really inciting, even if what the characters are talking about, you know, there's a lot of exposition and dialogue and they have to go through a lot of minutia, but it's incredibly readable because the flow of the art is just so good.
In that sense, I think he really emulates the energy of shonen comics really well, because he really captures that kind of kinetic energy of you know, shonen battle comics. Even though this is a comic about making comics, you know, there's a lot of energy and animation to the characters. They're not just like talking heads on a page, even though they are talking heads on a page in a lot of places. But you see what I'm saying? Like, in that sense, in the sense of how these characters are presented, it really does feel like a Shonen Jump comic. So, you know, I think it's successful in that regard, at least.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that was always part of its appeal and what it drew so many people to it. was that, it was as exciting to read as a chapter of One Piece and Naruto back in the day. And even though characters weren't punching each other or like usually or like getting into like crazy stunts. Yeah, every now and again it does happen. But even though the characters weren't usually going to crazy stunts and most of the chapter was just conversations, like it just felt exciting to read because of the variety of ways that Ohba could make and Obata could make these conversations interesting through the art. And I think that is a real testament to Obata's skill in particular as an artist. And, why I really, really respect him as an artist and what he's capable of. I mean, yeah, like I said, is like we can all agree once again that Bakuman's actual content may not be the most agreeable, I guess, is the word I guess I'm going to use. The presentation of the series is always like on point, and I think is always very good.
The way I look at this, Bakuman is a problematic fave. So
yeah,
and I can't fault anyone for liking Bakuman. But here's the thing about problematic favorites: you can like problematic favorites, but you got to acknowledge their problematic aspects. You can't just defend and toss them aside. And as long as you're willing to do that, then yeah, who cares? Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just justify and excuse all the problems. You need to acknowledge them and address that they need to be improved on and should be challenged, but you can still enjoy what you enjoy about the work.
Exactly.
Even besides Bakuman, I know that there's plenty of other manga that I like. Heck, every manga that I like has something problematic in it. Like Dragon Ball, come on. In chapter 3, Bulma lifts up her skirt and Master Roshi sees an underage girl naked. Come on. That's problematic. That's not... It's supposed to be funny, but, it's something to challenge and criticize. But, I can still enjoy Dragon Ball as a whole, even though acknowledging those problems.
See, at the same time, though, I almost admire Toriyama for that, because he still used that to move the story along, which I think in and of itself is amazing, almost. Toriyama's just great like that. I don't know how he does it. But I do agree that, yeah, it's still pretty questionable. But anyway, yeah, I agree. Like, I struggle to think of a series in general that doesn't have at least one problematic element that I could think of.
Slam Dunk.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. I can't really think of anything from Slam Dunk in particular that I really had a problem with. I guess it's just perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
To me, I can never I never really like it when it's as simple as, like, oh, problematic thing, point it out, criticize it, move on. I think that things that are problematic are often so... It's often so indicative of just like what's down in a person's gut, and that's usually what I want to see in art. So it's like always like there's a natural wrestle where like I don't want the bullshit polished out a lot of the time. Like sometimes I actually just want to know what the person thinks and feels, even if it's bullshit.
Well, I mean, I kind of want Ohba to reconsider his thoughts on women and how he writes them, though.
And like I think it kind of goes to the other problem of like there being a lot of mixed messages in Bakuman. I think that like obviously Ohba has like legit issues with women, like that stuff is coming from him, I believe. I don't think it goes completely unwrestled with in the story. Like you can have in like chapter 2 is like just like so shocking and weird and gross, but then it's also like, oh, but like that's a conversation between two boys, and then the second that there's another person in the room, it's suddenly like the things they're saying don't sound nearly as cool. There is at least like one moment where you have one character telling Takagi, oh, you are terrible at writing women, go talk to a woman and figure that out. And the whole like Aoki and Nakai thing, like there's definitely an emphasis on when Nakai is portrayed as sympathetic, like it's such a strong point to the ways in which he's also very manipulative. Like he can lure you into feeling sorry for him, and then he'll just like take advantage of that.
Yeah.
But I feel they don't adequately point that out.
And yeah, that's true. And then that then goes to what is simultaneously one of Bakuman's like strengths and weaknesses, which is I do not think that it is, I don't think of it as like an essay that has a thesis statement that it's trying to support. It's basically just all brain vomit. It's just like the the excitement of like, I'm having a thought and it's the most important thing I've ever thought in the world. I'm going to write it down, and then you write it down and then the adrenaline comes down, but you send it off to get published anyway. Which is such a, like, I think that's where so much of the energy comes from. And that's also where some of the ickiness also comes from.
You know, we keep bringing up mixed messages, and it just makes me think about the moment I tweeted in my thread about how at one of the New Year's parties, Iwase and Aoki arrive, and Fukuda makes a comment, and Yujiro, like, you know, calls him out on it and says it's sexist, when it's really not even that bad of a comment, first off.
It's
Ohba said worse.
not the worst thing Fukuda has said about a woman either.
Yeah, and also there's some level of irony to having a character written by Ohba calling out another character written by Ohba for his sexism. It's really weird.
Somebody has definitely called Ohba out on it, and he is not over it.
I mean, probably, yeah.
I think maybe that's a dig at fans then for calling Ohba sexist. He's like, Fukuda makes like what's supposed to be, just a joke, and then Hattori like calls him, you're sexist, and then maybe that's Ohba saying this, you shouldn't take this so seriously.
See, I'm hip. I know what my problems are. And then proceeds to not go very far with it.
See, I like women too.
Yeah.
It's one of those, I don't think that word means what you think it means type of moments.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But yeah, I guess, is there anything else we want to put out there before we get into, like, Twitter questions, I guess?
I guess to wrap up our thoughts on Bakuman, you know, would we recommend the series to anyone today?
That's
I guess that question.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, that's hard.
I don't know if I could recommend it to anyone. Unless the only people I could recommend it to are people who are specifically interested in a Shonen Jump manga about making Shonen Jump manga. If it's a manga about making manga, I would point them elsewhere to, as Nick has mentioned before, Monthly Girls and Saki-kun. Stuff that hasn't been licensed, but I wish it were because they're great, like Blue Blazes and Kakugaku Shikachika. I'd point into stuff like that. A Drifting Light by Yoshihiro Tatsumi is amazing. Like, that's more of a historical thing, so you wouldn't, like, learn about, like, modern industry, but, like, again, that's a great manga about making manga. So I point him to examples like that.
The thing you have to be careful about with a drifting life is that Tatsumi takes a lot of artistic liberties on how he represents history and stuff. So just a disclaimer there.
Yeah, but like, don't, again, kind of like Bakuman, don't take everything presented in it as fact. But like as a story, like I think you can enjoy that. You can learn some things from a drifting life, you know, that are interesting about like how the beginnings of the Gekiga movement, just like in very broad strokes.
Personally, I wouldn't go out of my way to tell people, hey, you might not want to read that, but like if I saw somebody who had interest in reading Bakuman, you know, I wouldn't actively recommend it, but I wouldn't really actively like I wouldn't actively recommend people not checking it out. Like, you know, if people have interest in it, then, you know, I don't think there's any harm in them checking it out if they want to.
You're a better person than I am.
I would probably preface it with the problematic fave comment, because like in the world of art about making art, like there's a lot of different, like none of it makes, still to this day, none of it makes me feel the very specific things that Bakuman makes me feel, and like it's still so. But also, like I understand that it's like I don't think it's important at all that people have the experience with Bakuman that I have. And the issues, the sexism and whatnot, like it does impact how enthusiastic I am talking about it to other people. It's kind of a weird, where like I think like I'm still at this point where I'm like just compartmentalizing it instead of like really tackling it head on, and that's just my issues. But completely lost track of that. I don't know. Like it's just it is odd because like it is a very important manga to me, and I do want to like I love being able to say that, but I'm also like trying to learn to accept that. I don't know, maybe it's time, the time frame to really share it with other people is maybe past.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still value my experiences with Bakuman like in my formative years, but yeah, I mean that's different from I can accept those and still like be critical of the series and like say, you know, the series I'm no longer as fond of it as I am anymore. but I can look at it at a critical lens and point out, here are some good things about it that can be appealing to some, and then here are some things that make it unappealing to many others.
Nah, it's trash. I would never recommend this comic to anyone. I don't think the merits of this comic outweigh its problems, and
I think that's fair. Yeah,
I would actively discourage people from reading this comic personally because, even though there's not a whole lot available, the viewpoints and the perspective that it gives, even if it's just limited to Shonen Jump, I think it's potentially damaging to especially impressionable readers. But I don't see the value in this comic, and even reading the amount that I did for this podcast, it was a struggle. It was a real effort for me to make it through. And I would point. I agree with Sid that I would point people to A Drifting Life, or I'll Give It My All Tomorrow, or I would encourage people to start bringing even A Monkey Can Draw Manga back up again, and maybe
that'd be amazing.
Maybe start getting that into publishers' ears again, of rescuing that license and finally finishing it, and maybe exploring some other avenues for comics about the comic creative process. And this isn't necessarily related to the creation process, but there's another series called Kingyo-Yu's Books that was part of the Viz Iki line. That's more about reading comics, but it's also about reading comics critically, which I think Bakuman really fails at, even though it's about making comics and it's about the process. I feel like a lot of times when they're talking about the actual content of the comics, it's very ethereal and not grounded, and they're not actually having a meaningful discussion about it. It's more about, well, this is going to be popular, this isn't going to be popular.
What's going to sell?
Yeah,
what's going to sell?
Talk about it in those terms.
And, that's a very myopic way of looking at it. So, this comic blows. Move on.
And I think that's a very valid viewpoint, too. I can't really blame you for feeling that way, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, while I said I would still recommend it to people who want to read a Shonen Jump manga by reading Shonen Jump manga, I would probably not recommend it to readers of an impressionable age. I'd probably recommend it to just utter adults who can look at the series critically and not be influenced by its values.
If someone asked me to recommend something about reading Shonen Jump manga, or creating Shonen Jump manga, I'd still point them to Nozaki-kun instead, even though that's not even related to Shonen Jump at all. Anyway.
Yeah, very, very middle of the road recommendations, mostly, I would say.
Yeah, all over the spectrum here, but I think we can move on to some questions. So let's start off with a question from our good friend Maxie Bernard, and he asks, Bakuman is full of advice for authors as to what does or doesn't work in a comic book, but how well does it actually listen to its own words? And now, I have one right off the bat. Is that very beginning at the series, Hattori is telling Takagi, your style is too novelistic. You have too much text, too much exposition. But, Bakuman is a very dense, word-heavy series. There's a lot of dialogue, a lot of text on the page. But it's even worse than Bakuman because Death Note had a lot of action chapters too. So it wasn't quite as bad as it is in Bakuman, which again, most chapters are conversation after conversation. Later on in the series, they also come to the realization that they need to let the art breathe and emphasize quiet moments without text. But even after that point, the Bakuman itself is still very text driven, and there aren't a whole lot of just quiet moments where the art just breathes. So it does not follow its advice when it comes to dialogue and exposition and how much text there should be per chapter and on the page.
I was gonna say, as much as I love Obata's art in Bakuman, it's very, very rare that the series lets Obata's work, his artwork, speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they also have a problem. They bring up, or they grapple with mixing genres and shifting genres from one to another. And this comic has that problem too. At some points, it's an actual technical look at the industry, and then at every other point it's a sports manga parading as something completely different.
And then it becomes a romantic comedy after in many chapters.
A super trash romantic comedy. Yeah, it's like it doesn't heed its own advice at any point in the series. It's pretty ironic, and I don't think that's an intentional satirical point. I think that's just an oversight that they made.
Well, there was the I don't know how far you got in your most recent reread, but like there was a point where like as Mashiro is like trying to stylize his art more and like make it more bold, like you see that transition happen in the art of Bakuman itself. Like I remember that being a really notable example of it, if it actually following its own ideas. Or
yeah, the use of screen tones. Mashiro comes to the realization that he needs to use less screen tones to let like his art breathe and not make it look less dark. I definitely think that was something that I saw in Bakuman itself. Like at certain points, like Obata took that advice at some point.
Yeah, but I think it's safe to say that Bakuman really doesn't follow its own advice most of the time, or if at all.
Very infrequently, at the very least.
Yeah.
Corey asks, on a scale of 1 to Ohba about how sexist is Bakuman. I mean, we kind of addressed this.
A sideways 9.
Yeah.
I give it 2 thumbs down.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Two thumbs out of 5.
On a scale of one to Obata, I can't think of anything that's more sexist than this off the top of my head. So I think it's all the way at the Obata end of the scale.
Yeah. Gabby asked, this is also another comment about sexist tropes in series, but also specifically the treatment of Awase, which I ranted about earlier in the podcast too. But I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on Awase? Because I laid my disappointment with how she was treated very clearly.
I think I might have said it earlier, but I never thought Iwase was an interesting character, and very, very, very rarely was I ever I guess invested in her rivalry with Takagi. I just didn't care about her at all. Nakai I hated for what he represented, but Iwase I dislike on a different level as far as just how interesting her character is, because I just didn't think, honestly, when she sometimes, most of the time I didn't think she was interesting, but there were also other times where I just I know we talked about earlier how the series seems to really glorify certain extremes. We were talking about how the characters in the series really idolize Azuki for being this this really shy, quiet girl who doesn't really go against anybody. She just kind of does whatever. Whereas Iwase is very driven and competitive, and
so that's what I liked about her.
Well, I'm saying that the characters themselves don't like that about her, which I don't think is
another part. I think what made me endeared to her is because the series itself was against her, and I was like, oh man, now I root for you because even your author is against you.
And that's fair, but my problem is that her personality is so extreme that to me she's unlikable. Because there are times where
Nanamine is also really shitty and unlikable, but I like him as an antagonist, and I kind of like the Waze at her most unlikable in that same vein. Even though she was gonna do she was so petty, she was gonna try and ruin Asuki's career because she turned down the role to play the heroine of Plus Natural. Even stuff like that, I thought that was an endearing part of her role as an antagonistic rival. And she was until Nanamine, she was the only antagonistic rival. So I kind of did appreciate that aspect of her.
Yeah, unfortunately, I completely disagree, and I just honestly I could have done without her.
That's fair. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely Ohba finds that kind of smart woman intimidating, so he wants to beat her. Basically.
Yeah, I hate that so much.
Oh man, what about you, Nick?
I didn't get that far, and I'm kind of glad I didn't, so I have no opinion.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I forgot
And
about
so
that.
now this is a good question, I think, to kind of end off on. And this is from JSamF, or at AnimateSam, and he asks, what were your personal best and worst highlights of the series?
I could probably get mine out of the way since I mentioned them earlier, but I think my personal highlight of the series was the point in the story where again Mashiro had to be hospitalized and he still wanted to work on his series. Again, I really credit that, even though, again, there are a lot of mixed messages in the portrayal of that particular part of the story. I still credit that part of the series for being really influential on me as a teenager, where from that point on, I definitely never took the manga or just comics I read in general for granted. Like, I've always been super appreciative of the work that goes into these series since that point in the series. And so I have to really credit that part of the story for me being thankful for the work and time that goes into creating these stories. Mm-hmm. But I think, I kept trying to find a place to mention this while we were talking about the sexism in Bakuman, but I think out of all the sexist parts of the story, the one that really irritated me the most and got under my skin the most was the very beginning where Mashiro's trying to get get his parents blessing to become a manga artist, and I really hate all that stuff where, like, clearly his mom is against it, and honestly for good reason. Because, obviously Mashiro's uncle died of overwork. And some characters in the series, rightfully so, try to make sure that he takes care of himself, that he doesn't end up like his uncle. And I think that's totally understandable, especially coming from his mother. But, his mom is obviously very against it at first. But then, after bringing it up with his father, what was it? I'm going to bring up this quote because it just...
Men have dreams that women could never understand or something.
Yeah, I think that perfectly encapsulates just every single problem with this series so perfectly that it's not even funny. Like,
it's funny. The short-lived dub actually changed that line to be about children and adults and not men and women.
I think that's interesting. I think if Ohba and Obata went with that, I think that would have been a little more understandable. I think that actually would have been more relatable, almost. But again,
that's not what they wrote.
I think that would have been even more condescending to Mashiro's mom than the women-men thing. Cause
then it's like saying that
she's a child and doesn't have the opinions of an adult.
No. She says that dad says that children have dreams that us adults don't understand, and the dad.
See.
It's like, oh, I don't understand your dreams, but I'm going to support you, is sort of dad's message, I guess.
See, that's a little more relatable, I think, but too bad they didn't. Too bad that wasn't a part of the original story. But in general, there are just times where Mashiro just, I feel like, is really disrespectful to his mom for no reason, and that always really rubbed me the wrong way. Because she's presented as this nagging mother figure, oh, you have to study, and I don't want you to be a manga artist, and blah 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 blah, or whatever. I'm the typical nagging mother, when she has legitimate concern for him wanting to get into an industry that could actually kill you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, she's supposed to be a voice of reason, but everyone treats her as a spoil sport for not letting. That's
a scene
you
where
understand, Mom.
That's a scene where I think
and then
Obata's
Shiratori's mother is treated the same way when she's introduced later on. I think the only mother depicted positively is Azuki's mom, who is still barely a character in the manga, though.
Yeah. What were you saying, Sam?
I was saying, I think that's the scene with the mom. I think that's a good scene of Obata's art actually bringing something that probably wasn't in the text that Ohba wrote, because when she's saying that, you have to look her in the face while she says that. You know that she doesn't agree with what she's saying and that she's just giving up because the men in her life are just being obnoxious.
Yeah, I agree. As much as I don't like that moment, Obata's artwork does a great job of depicting the emotion on her face.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I wish, Ohba's writing, Ohba
it's another mixed message.
Her to have an equal
I think the
voice.
Sympathy is there. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Obata draws her sympathetically, but Ohba doesn't value her voice, and that's consistent in the series.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess for me, my favorite moments, like Colton, I think my absolute favorite was the arc where Mashiro was that entire Detective Trap arc where they had their new series, they were being competitive with Nizuma, tied for him at third, but then tragedy strikes because Mashiro overworks himself, lands up in the hospital, and there's this whole conflict where Mashiro wants to continue working, doesn't want to give up on their dream when they're so close to pursuing, to having a popular series in the magazine, and they know that a hiatus will like kill their momentum. And then all their friends, they understand how passionate Mashiro is, so they try to help him by boycotting and saying, you gotta let Mashiro continue. And, as much as I disagree with that, it's like, I think the emotion and energy in that part of the story was like so compelling. And I was really into it. And then, in general, a lot of the times when Mashiro and Takaki are directly competing with Nizuma were really, really exciting. Like, when they have PCP and, they have this, like, stipulation that if PCP is not as popular as Natural and Crow, if it's not, like, going toe-to-toe with them in the rankings, like, they'll be dropped after 25 chapters. So, that part of the story was really really engaging. Like, their strategy to make PCP, like, competitive, and, like, they're taking a risk on doing a story arc, betting it all on, like, the last chapter of the arc to, like, push them up in the upper echelons of the rankings. That was really good. I was not able to like fully reread this part of the story, but when Nizuma's like saying like, oh, I'm gonna cancel my series. Like I made this I made them promise me that if I became the #1 artist in Jump, they'll let me cancel any series I choose, and I want to cancel my series so I can go on and do a new thing. And then everyone's like, no, we haven't beaten you yet. We're not gonna let you end it like this. And so they're competing with him to try and be better than him so that Nizuma will not end his series, but Nizuma does ultimately stay on top and get to end the series. And that part was really good. In general, every part that involved Nizuma and competing with Nizuma was really good, outside of like the hospital storyline. And then the worst parts, we kind of, like, anything that had, like, such awful sexism and like, focused on the Asuki-Mashiro romance were just terrible. Nakai parts were always terrible. Awase, everyone, like, shitting on Awase and she trying to commit suicide, that was awful. A lot of the part, the whole stupid misunderstanding between Miyoshi and Takaki, where like Awase gave Takaki her book, and she had a letter to him in the book, and Miyoshi misinterpreted it as like Takaki was cheating on her. And then there was this whole thing where Takaki and Mashiro don't want to just like tell them the truth for no good reason. Like they don't want Asuki to know that Takaki was talking to Okiko, and Okiko based like her manga off of Mashiro and Asuki's romance, and so they keep that under wraps, but they make it worse because they just explained that would solve the entire situation, and they're like, oh no, they should apologize to us for not trusting us. And I'm like, no, just tell them the truth. You are in the wrong here for keeping secrets. What the hell? And then, of course, that all resolving with, Takaki proposing to Miyoshi under the stupid logic that, oh, if you're married to me, I'll always be together with you and you won't have to worry about me cheating on you. Even though that was, again, like I mentioned, they were already doing that. She was always already around Takaki. They were always spending time together. That doesn't make any sense. That part was really stupid. And then, in terms of a boring part, like the stuff where, with Shiratori, his whole deal with his mom not wanting to let him be a manga artist because, she thought manga was low art and he needed to study painting in Paris or whatever. That whole part was, I don't know. I don't dislike the character Shiratori, but that part of the story I did not care about and I didn't necessarily care about the whole the competition, the Love Fest competition, where all the mangaka were making romance one shots and they're competing each other with that. because again, Ohba's views on romance manga, what makes a good romance manga, were kind of terrible. The only part about that that part of the story I liked is that Okiko won that contest between them, and she did it with a story that she was happy with without having to make like stupid concessions like fan service. So that was the only part of that I liked about. Really, I felt that was kind of like a fillery kind of thing that was like, we have this arc with competition with Nizuma with PCP. Now PCP's successful, and then the story drags until Nanamine shows up, and then Nanamine is good. Oh, but I guess the second Nanamine arc I didn't care about that much. Like, it was a repeat of the first, pretty much. I didn't think it had much value.
I honestly didn't really think there was a reason for him to come back.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like Ohba wanted to say something about like, oh, here are these old authors who want to make it into Jump, but they're so old, so no one would take them seriously. But thanks, Nanamine is helping them come up with these like really engaging stories through like his processes or whatever. But then, so I think like he wanted to do a story about like, hey, even these old mangaka can still make stuff for Shonen Jump too, I think I feel like Ohba was changing his mind about what he wanted to do with characters throughout the series. I think that was a story he wanted to tell with Nakai. Then he made Nakai so unlikable he couldn't do that. So in the end, he made these new characters. He engineered this new situation to tell this kind of story. But I didn't. It was like a Hattori focused arc, and I generally like Hattori, so I sort of enjoy those parts. But all the Nanamine parts were just a repeat, and I didn't think like there was a reason to bring him back. But yeah, I guess I went on a little long about that, but still, yeah.
Yes, save some moments for us, Sid.
Well, you already went, so. But I'm sorry for shortchanging Sam here.
Colton, you tweeted a scene which was that conversation between that conversation about commercial versus personal art.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I wasn't there, like on my skimming through and catching up, like I wasn't there yet, but like I saw you post that and just like immediately clicked in my head, like, oh my god, like that's like been in me for years now.
I think it's a good moment.
Yeah, it really left, and all the instances, all the themes or instances in which like I like how gimmick and cliche are not dirty words in these like conversations that they're having. I like that there's like a real reverence for the kind of the shonen, like I guess template and cliches and whatnot.
It's very encouraged, and I think that's like the way they go about that is actually one of the few refreshing things about the series, in my opinion.
Yeah, they treat them as like tools that are necessary for an author to employ sometimes, because keeping their series afloat is a matter of survival and it's important for their career. And so, it's something that you have to think about if you want to be successful manga artist.
And then worst moments, chapter 2 is pretty bad.
Yeah.
The ending just kind of loses all of its energy for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like most of the romance stuff in general, like I basically just skip on rereads.
That's totally fair. Yeah. What about you, Nick? What's your favorite moment in Bakuman?
I think we know what your worst parts are, but like, was there anything in Bakuman that you liked?
Anything.
Genuinely, Miyoshi was my favorite character, and I hate that I come to accept that because of how poorly Miyoshi is treated in this series. Like, she's an example of how they could succeed with a really strong female character if they even gave her an ounce of agency. And these little moments she has where these little bubbles of clarity, I thought were the strong points in the series that where I got. But in general, the discussions they have with Akira Hattori, I think, were the strongest parts of the series, because the way they present him and his pragmatism and his perspective are all really cool and especially unique for a Shonen Jump title. So I thought that he actually had some valuable insight in like his moments where he's talking with them and kind of influencing them and directing them. I thought those were actually some redeemable qualities in the comic. But as far as the worst is concerned, oh no, let me go back to favorites. Otter number 11, because every time Otter number 11 came up, I was like, why can't I be reading that comic instead of Bakuman?
I think they actually made a one shot for it.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, they did, and they made a one shot for it, and then Viz even actually published it in one of their like weekly Shonen Jump like yearbook things, bonuses that comes with like their digital Jump subscription. Though I think at the time they were still called like Shonen Jump Alpha. They did do like a digital version of it, which thankfully I own. I meant to read the Otter 11 one shot again for the podcast, but I didn't get a chance to because I had read it when it was scanned originally. But I actually still haven't read the official version yet, so I actually kind of want to go and check that out.
But as far as the worst moments in this comic, the typesetting in the English volumes, what was going on with that? Like, it's like they were rolling a die to decide what alignment the text was going to appear in the word bubbles. Like, what happened there?
I think I might know what you're talking about, because there are some points where like, and granted, I didn't feel like there were a lot of them, but I did notice sometimes where like, sometimes like the text would be like way too small for certain word bubbles and stuff.
The alignment was a problem. It's like almost on every page of every volume. It's crazy. So I don't know what happened there, but that was something I fixated on because that's just something I noticed because I'm crazy. But I don't know. This comic, all the romance stuff was so contrived and so awful and gave me bad flashbacks of eyes that I just didn't want to remember. And the dynamics between all the dynamics between Mishiro and Azuki, like. Or not Azuki, Takagi, like they're forgettable characters. Pretty much the entire cast of this comic is forgettable.
Even Hiromaru and Eiji?
Yeah, even Hiromaru and Eiji. Like Eiji, I guess he's memorable in the sense that he's eccentric, but that's his one character trait. I like the fact that they didn't make him an outright villain, at least as far as I got, but. I don't know. The second I move past Bakuman, I'm not really gonna remember any of these characters, and they're all cookie cutter stereotypes, and it's just they're unremarkable.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
I could go on and on and on about the things I dislike, but I'll just say that as a whole, I think the entire comic I disliked.
I think a lot of the characters are memorable, but not all of them for good reasons. Again, like Nakai and Awase. Like I remember them because I remember being frustrated with how they were handled, or like just their character in general. I hated. But yeah, Mashiro and Takaki, like as protagonists. Like when I was when I was a teen, I was reading them, and I could like. I was invested in them because here were kids my age, and this was a story about them like making a big and jump, and so I was invested in them on that level. But like as characters, as people, and like what they believe in and like what they want, I'm not like now that I read it, I cannot find Mashiro relatable at all outside of like his dedication to improving his art, which like is still like, oh man, I look at it and I'm like, man, that's effort. And Takaki, the amount of effort he puts in the story is like, I respect their work ethic, but I don't care about them, like their characterization at all. I don't find them distinct compared to other, protagonists of their nature in shonen manga.
To illustrate my point, I've had to keep a copy of one of the volumes on hand, because when you guys have started to talk about characters, I seriously have to go to the character introduction page at the beginning of the volume in order to remember who exactly you're talking about. Because even though I did kind of a close reading of this comic, I still had no idea who all the characters were. So that's just a way to punctuate what I was talking about.
But I think that's it for Twitter questions then.
Yeah. I guess that's the end of our discussion. I mean, I think we covered a lot of bases. This is another characteristically long episode of the Manga Mavericks podcast.
See, I'm okay with the length of the discussion for this one because I feel like we really covered a lot of. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I don't think any of it was wasted.
Yeah, I think it's important to touch all the bases and address as much as possible. So I think we did a good job at that. I guess one last thing that I forgot I wanted to mention that I didn't have a chance to sneak it in. I hope they license the Bakuman live action movie at some point, because if I want to recommend someone to experience Bakuman, or like if someone wants to experience Bakuman, I would just point into that live action movie, because it does away with pretty much all the sexism problems, and it gives Azuki much more agency. Like, Azuki dumps Mashiro in that movie because he overworks himself. Like, she doesn't encourage him. And yeah, they don't get back together either. So, you know, it's a lot more harsh and real in that sense. And I think it depicts things more realistically, which, you know, it's in live action, so it has the benefit of being able to do that too. So I actually like the Bakuman movie more than the manga in terms of like taking what's great from the manga and like doing away with all the shitty parts. So I hope that movie gets licensed at some. It's been like 4 years, so probably not. But I remember I watched that and I was like really impressed with it. I was like, wow. I wish they could make more of these movies, so I wouldn't have to read the manga, maybe, to experience the story, the best parts of the story.
That sounds really interesting. I'm going to have to seek that out or something.
Mm-hmm.
But no, yeah, I think we had a really good discussion this time around, and I really enjoyed myself. Thank you guys so much for coming on. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was good talk.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
We're sorry for making you read Bakuman, though.
That's okay. I have a volume of Descending stories I've been waiting to cleanse my palate for after this discussion.
Yeah, there you go.
That's honestly, that's a really good choice. Yeah, Nick, I promise next time we have you on the show, it'll be for a series that you actually like.
I don't like. I feel bad coming on to just dunk a series because, like, you know, I think the reason for discussions like this is to kind of discuss series critically, and we did that extensively. But I do my best to try and talk about some positives alongside the negatives, and I can't do that with this one so much. and I feel bad being the harumphing guy on this episode. So, but thank you for indulging me.
It's okay. I think we covered the positives well enough. I mean, like, I like that. That's part of the reason we wanted to have you on, was because I think we really needed somebody with those stronger viewpoints, because I mean, like, Bakuman is obviously, as we talked about for 3 hours, it is not perfect. And I mean, it, like, I hate to say it like this, but I think certain parts of the series deserve to be called out on. But like I said, thank you guys for coming on. I guess we can start plugging away at our stuff. So, Sam, where can the good people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Lucky Chainsaw. They can find me on the One Piece podcast every week doing the anime recaps, and they can find me on AnimeNewsNetwork.com doing the daily streaming reviews for One Piece, My Hero Academia, and Black Clover.
All right, yeah, definitely go follow Sam and all of his stuff. Definitely go listen to him on the One Piece podcast. He's a great guy in general. Nick, do you have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SPD4649 if you like hearing random rants and hearing about Fist of the North Star and fighting games and stuff. You can find me on the Totally Whelmed podcast, which is on SoundCloud and on iTunes. I'd recommend starting with episode like 52, because we just changed our format to talk about, specific books instead of just kind of the topics of the week. And I'm an occasional contributor to All Comic as well. I need to be more on top of that, but you can find my stuff on there.
Yeah, definitely go follow Nick as well. But yeah, Sid, what about you?
You can find me as @LoneRamayasha on Twitter. and on AniList and Animation Revelation under that name. Basically, anywhere there's a Lone Ramayasha, I'll be there. You can read my manga reviews on all-comic.com. I write monthly reviews for Dragon Ball Super, did some movie reviews recently for the Sailor Moon movies. Definitely plan to keep writing on a consistent rate. Nick is my editor for all the stuff I write for all-comic.com, and he does a great job on that as well. So yeah, definitely give those a read.
All right. Yeah, definitely go follow all of Sid's stuff too. Be sure to look forward to his reviews. But as for me, I'm Colton. You can find me on Twitter at SniperKing323. Occasionally tweeting whatever I'm thinking. I usually tweet about the manga and comics I read. And then I have a few other podcasts such as Life Lessons, the Gintama Manga Cast, which is on a bit of a hiatus at the moment, but you could still listen to all of our backlog over at gintalifelessons.wordpress.com. You can also listen to One Podcast Prevails at onepodcastprevails.com. Basically, the same kind of show, except we talk about Detective Conan or Case Closed as through the Viz Media release. We talk about a couple of chapters or so every episode. I really enjoy recording that. So you should definitely go listen to that if you're a fan of Detective Conan. But as for the podcast and all comic in general, you can find every episode of our podcast over at all-comic.com. Again, that's where we post every episode first. You can also follow us on facebook.com/all.comic or on twitter.com/allcomic_. You can also follow Manga Mavericks specifically on Twitter at manga_Mavericks. That's where we post updates on the podcast first. That's where you get the quickest updates anyway, as well as on mangamavericks.tumblr.com. You should also subscribe to us on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Manga Mavericks. At the time of this recording, we are less than 10 subscribers away from 200 subscribers, so...
Yeah, we only need 3 subscribers at the time of this recording, so...
Oh, wow. Okay, so hopefully we can maybe get to 200 before the episode's out. I don't know. It's possible.
And if we do, we'll do another special live stream.
All right, so if you want to see us do a special live stream, please go subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't. It's where we post excerpts of our podcast and whatnot. I'm sure our Bakuman discussion will be up there eventually. What do you think about Bakuman and other works from Ohba and Obata? Just like, what are you reading right now? What do you think about the podcast in general? You can email us anything about those topics at mangamavericks@gmail.com, and we will be sure to read your emails on the show. So we like it when we get emails, so you should send us those. But the most important thing, guys, is that you subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcast or iTunes, whatever you call it. It really helps the visibility of our shows, so definitely go do that if you so wish to. But I think that's going to be about it for the show. Again, really great discussion this time around. And again, special thanks to Sam and Nick for coming on. And this has been episode 57 of our podcast. And we will see you guys next time on episode 58. Bye, guys.
Sayonara.
See ya.
Should I stop recording?